What is up, everybody? It's the Vish Kumaran show. I'm Vish Kumaran, and it's Tuesday night, and I'm joined by, one of the legends of 49ers radio and Larry Krueger. When I first started doing this, I never thought I would have some sort of a weekly show that's any sort of consistent because one of my personal issues, just as a human being, just sharing, is time management and managing all the different things I need to do. So I never thought I could be organized enough to have a scheduled stream. And somehow we've made it, like 6 Tuesdays in a row, Larry?
I know. And I have to apologize because Ryan, I was supposed to be on today with Ryan Hensley, and I got late breaking word from a sponsor that the Krug Show has gotten its funding for its trip to spring training, and we had all set it up to go the 8th through the 12th. As you know, that means that's tomorrow. So I have to apologize. Well, I want to say that I'm absolutely thrilled to be here with you, Vish, and always love to do this. I feel bad because I also kind of pride myself on being organized and having like a tight schedule and having all my ducks in a row. And I got overwhelmed today, and I didn't wind up. I missed my stream with Ryan Hensley, and I want to apologize to Ryan because he's a good dude, and I had no disrespect meant. But I guess all I can say is, when the spring training trip is 24 hours away, I become a circus, you know?
So, yeah, it's nice that you brought up Ryan. Ryan is a really, really good content creator. I also had the opportunity to go on with him. He does a really, really good job. He's very creative in the show format that he's brought. And I think that a little bit of uniqueness in the 49ers community, when you have a lot of people like myself simply just parroting Grant's format, it's cool. It's cool that he's being creative and unique. So shout out to him for that. And then
Yeah.
Krug, I mean, I'm shocked to hear this as somebody who's actually, one of the people who does not have their ducks in a row at times and has pulled out his streams because, oh crap, I didn't realize I'm triple booked on that day. I know that you never do this or you've never done this. I know that it was probably complete. I know it would be completely unintentional. And for the number of time, I'm not Ryan, obviously, but for the number of times that you've forgiven me, because I think I've done that to you a couple of times for sure. I really appreciate. I'm sure Ryan will forgive you as well, because life happens.
Yeah, I mean, but you know how it is when you're hosting the show, and you got to plan it, and you got to, it's like it's just different. And no, I want everybody who I book on the show to show up, and he wants everybody that he books on his show to show up, and I F that up today. So Ryan, if you're out there, brother, hopefully I can make it up to you. Nobody
Krug,
died
you're
or
too
anything, but
kind.
still, I just feel bad. I feel bad. What can I say?
No, 100. Shoot. That's not supposed to happen. A little bit of
Whoa.
theatrics here on the show. You
Man,
saw
that
me
mic
catch the
just
mic, though.
is that a
It
helium
flew.
mic? Is that
No,
that
no,
mic
it's
just
just
was
this. It's just the stand. But did you see the hands, Crew? Did you see the hand-eye
yes,
coordination?
that was
I
incredible.
was looking at the screen and I just kind of grabbed that.
I mean, that's too bad this isn't
I'm not.
like Sports Center. We could have replayed that and analyzed that.
Yeah,
Great
100%.
hand-eye
I
coordination.
I'm Kruger. I'm not even sure I could do that again because I was literally
You ought to
looking
be
at
a
you.
holder. You ought to try out for the Niners as the holder, because you got to have that kind of,
100%, 100%. But you also got to get
see how
used
quick that was
to
at the end?
a guy taking 6 steps, planting his leg real hard on the ground, and kicking straight through the ball. And you got to hope to God that he doesn't hit your little finger on the ball. And
Exactly.
it takes some guts there. And I don't know if I have those kinds of guts. But Larry, I did kind of clickbait this title.
Did you?
I
I've
uh
done
I
it.
I named the show. I told you before the show about the 49ers obviously trading for Lamar Jackson. Um we can talk about it. I do think it's a good conversation. I think what the Ravens did today, placing the non-exclusive tag on Lamar Jackson, was very interesting. And then, of course, there was the entire aspect of so many quarterback needy teams, Larry, that I thought that if you put Lamar Jackson on those teams, it completely changes the entire direction of their franchise. Seem to say that they aren't interested. there were a few people that were tweeting a little bit about some conspiracy theories about, the league colluding a little bit against Lamar Jackson to try and not make these guaranteed contracts a thing. It does seem a little bit fishy, but we're not here to talk about the league and all of that. We're here to talk about the 49ers. Obviously, Lamar Jackson would make this team so much better. He's a special football player, and he's actually an exceptional fit into what Shanahan is doing on offense, and his skill set completely fits it. The big thing would be that if the 49ers were able to acquire Lamar Jackson using the format of the Ravens without doing a sign-in trade, they would have to wait after the draft when they have both their first-round picks, and then they would have to give up their 2 picks, right? 24 and in first-round pick in 24, first-round pick in 25, and then ultimately make the big move to get Lamar. What do you think of all this? Do you even think it's possible? It's really not possible, is it? Or probable?
I don't see it. I mean, um, you know, first of all, what happened today is the Ravens placed the non-exclusive franchise tag on him. And that just means that he can negotiate with other teams and then he'll be guaranteed 32.4 million in salary.
Right.
And then the Ravens have the ability to match any offer that he gets, or if they decide not to match, they get 2 first-round picks.
Right.
So, it's definitely not the traditional route. I'm shocked that Ozzie Newsome and Eric DeCosta couldn't work this out. This is their franchise quarterback. Their head coach is on record as saying he wants Lamar. So Lamar, I don't believe is going anywhere. That's too rich of a price tag. You're going to have to satisfy the Ravens, Lamar in a contract. You're going to have to satisfy the Ravens in a deal, or if you can't, you're going to have to cough up 2 number ones. And then you got to look at Lamar, the player, and Lamar, the player I don't know what his future is. I mean, he sure looked a whole lot better in 2019 and 2020 than he has the last couple of years. That's for sure. His completion percentage has gone down, 3 years in a row or whatever it is. His completion percentage has gone down. His touchdown to interception ratio in 2019 was 36-6. That fell to 26-9 in 2020, 16-13 in 2021. He only slightly rebounded last year with 17-7. I mean, I like him, but he is a quarterback that does run a lot. He's a brilliant runner. But I just don't. He had an incredible MVP year in 2019, but I don't see him as the same quarterback the last couple of years, and I'd be really hesitant to pay him huge money long term when running is a big part of his game plan. And as he ages, that probably is something he probably becomes less dynamic as a runner. So I've got concerns over whether Lamar is somebody that is I know the bottom line is he is a very good NFL quarterback. Is he an elite quarterback? Is he a great quarterback? I don't know. I don't know about that. 13-2 season in 2019. He looked awesome. Since that point, the Ravens still have good talent, but his numbers have gone down. I'd like to hear some theories as to why. And also his sacks have gone up. He's been sacked a lot. How does a guy who moves this well sack 38 times? He's been sacked almost over 60 times in the last 2 years combined.
So they've had some major issues in their offensive line, right? To give context to that, right? Ronnie Stanley has been battling injuries for just about 3 years now. They had to let Orlando Brown walk. He was a good player. Marshall Yanda retired. So those are 3 guys that, have made Pro Bowls and all pros as offensive linemen that have walked. The Ravens are 32nd in the league in terms of cap spent on offense. That's including Lamar Jackson. 32nd in the league.
Who's his number 1 receiver?
Rashad Bateman, who they picked in the first round,
he hasn't flourished.
And then there's also Krug. You're all too familiar with one of the great run game coordinators in the NFL, but his pass game, and that's when Greg Roman is a little bit of a mess. But in terms of the last 3 years, he was the coordinator, right? The run game is phenomenal. It's as creative as it gets. The way they use the multiple tight ends, the way they move, pull guards, all of it. It's creative. The way they implement the quarterback run game, it's fantastic. They always have a good game plan with it. Pass game, though, Krug, lots of receivers in the same spot. If you go back and watch, happens a lot with their offense. Sometimes it doesn't even feel like you know what they're actually trying to do on a certain pass play. Like, you know, like when you're watching like a pass play out, right, Krug, you can see like, okay, this is what they're trying to do, right? They're trying to clear out, right? See what the offense
You're glitching a little bit.
lose me or did I lose you?
I thought you were glitching. I was listening to you, but
So I glitched.
I
Okay, perfect.
think
I glitched. I wasn't sure. Where did I glitch? Because that was,
just in
yeah,
that
unfortunate.
last 3 sentences.
Okay, perfect. Well, anyway, I was talking about Lamar and the pass game with Greg Roman. A lot of people in the same spot, issues with their pass game scheme. But you're right. Lamar also, I would say this year, I thought he played very, very well. I thought last year was one of his tougher years. Earlier in the season, he was really, really hot throwing the football last year, right? He had that incredible Monday night game against the Colts where I think he completed 38 passes and he was unreal throwing the football. But besides that, really, I mean, it was a rough season for him. He turned the football over a lot. But overall, Larry, I do think he is, on the precipice or on the cusp of being one of those elite guys, right? If you take Mahomes out of the conversation and you take possibly Allen and Burrow, gosh, you could probably argue Lamar Jackson in some capacity against anybody else. There's a few other guys I might take over him. Definitely Justin Herbert. Maybe a Jalen Hurts. I'm not sure. But the point is, he is on the precipice of being a top 5, top 4, top 3 quarterback. So he's still, I would say, well into the top 10 as a quarterback. I know there's some disagreement and pushback. I find some of the stuff on Lamar's game to be a little bit. I don't want to say. I would say some of the criticism is generalized and not necessarily well researched or not necessarily fair to what his skill set is and who his supporting cast is. Overall, though, in terms of Lamar to the 49ers, Larry, I think it would be a home run, but it just doesn't make sense, right? Doesn't make sense from a contract standpoint. The 49ers have talked so much about wanting this rookie quarterback window. They've paid so many different players on this football team. Sure, if they got Lamar Jackson tomorrow, Larry, like if it was possible in terms of resources and assets, like I think Kyle Shanahan and Lamar Jackson would be a dynamo duo. Like I think it would be awesome. I think it would be fireworks for the NFL. I think it would be all kinds of special, but I just don't think it's likely to happen. And as much as this discussion is fun and we can get into the weeds of Lamar and kind of the dichotomy he causes amongst NFL fans, right? Because there's a lot of differing opinions on how good he really is. But ultimately for the 49ers, Larry, I'm not sure if that one really, really makes sense or works as good as he is.
I mean, he hasn't done it in the playoffs. I mean, that's and that he's 1-3 in the playoffs, completed 55% of his passes, 3 touchdowns, 5 picks.
Mm-hmm.
So those are not great playoff numbers at all.
Right.
So can he lead you through the playoffs? I don't know. I don't know. He's a dynamic runner. I think part of the issue is the surrounding cast. These are his receivers: Devin Duvernay, Demarcus Robinson,
Oof.
Rashad Bateman, Sammy Watkins, Tylan Wallace, James Prochet. There's not a big time receiver in the bunch. That's not
There's
now
not
he's
even a
got
number
Mark
2 receiver
Andrews.
in there.
He's got Josh Oliver, Mark Andrews, and Isaiah Likely. He's got some good tight ends, and they run the
Right.
ball. It's a run offense. It's a run-based offense. And I think at times when you have Lamar's dynamic ability on third down, if you can build a dominant run game and a good defense, I think the Ravens are a legitimate Super Bowl contender. But you got to have to have a dominant run game. You have to have the threat of a pass game, and they have no threat of a pass game. And then Lamar's got to still prove it yet in the playoffs. So, to me, he's not a lock. I mean, he's had some really great statistical seasons, but as far as championship caliber quarterback, he's he's got one playoff win, and he's 1-3.
Yeah, I do think the 1-3, the one loss that's glaring, right, is the year they were 14-2, and he didn't play well against Tennessee. Now they didn't play well as a football team, right? Earl Thomas not tackling Derrick Henry was pretty pathetic in that game, but he didn't play
I mean, we
well.
could
But if you
debate
go
about
back,
the quarterback. I mean, I'm not one that subscribes to the theory that the quarterback is the record and the record is the quarterback.
right,
It's a team game. But if we're gonna sit there and allow people to be like Shanahan was 9-29, or and
yeah,
Jimmy
yeah, no,
Garoppolo is this record and that record. If we're gonna do that when guys are good, you got to do it when they're bad too. I mean, it's either a
no,
useful stat
100%.
or it ain't.
100%. And I do think with Lamar, the only reason I bring up the playoffs is because to me, it's a little more nuanced conversation. I understand what you're saying, right? The ultimately, as Bill Parcells once said, you are what your record says what you
Right.
are. But I do think when you go back, right, the first playoff game was him as a rookie against a Chargers team that had no business being in the wild card, right? They were a 12-4 football team. They beat the Chiefs twice that year. Phillip Rivers, that was one of the best seasons of his career. Unfortunately, they lost in New England. They got obliterated because they didn't have a single linebacker healthy the next week, but they had a good plan and they stopped Lamar Jackson. Then the next year, yes, I agree. He didn't play well against Tennessee. But then if you look at the next playoffs, which is where his other two starts come, right? They beat Tennessee in the wild card. He played very well. And then they lost to Buffalo in the divisional round. He threw a pick six, but that game was a little bit back and forth. The pick six, obviously, you can't do that, can't have it. But I do think the Ravens haven't necessarily supported him as adequately on offense. And I keep going back to, right, Larry,
No
they
doubt.
spent the least money on offense in the NFL with Lamar Jackson at quarterback. They're basically, a lot of their offense is, hey, Lamar Jackson, save us. And I do think when we're talking about as a passer, um, you're right, the passing offense wasn't good. I don't necessarily put that on Lamar as much. I do think Lamar has some culpability, right? Passing offense is not good. You do have to talk about the quarterback. But there's more than just the quarterback here. I do think it was a coordinator issue. I don't think Greg Roman is very good at scheming up the pass game. If we had time and if I had the patience, I can go back and clip up from any season, any game, pass plays where, hey, I can show you the concept Baltimore is running, and five guys, or they got three guys running routes, and all guys are in the exact same spot. And you tell me where he's supposed to throw the ball. I don't know. I don't know. But that's even besides the point. So I do think that there's a little bit there. And then you brought up the other point, right? Like Hollywood Brown was a pretty good player. He was not a number one receiver. They actually stole, I thought, a first round pick from him from Arizona. And I think they used that first round pick on Linderbaum, by the way. So that's a dynamo first round pick because
Smart.
that dude's a superstar. And then otherwise, they've had what? Bateman. He struggled to stay healthy. Maybe I didn't like him so much before the draft, but I
He
know a lot
doesn't
of
really
people
gain a lot
did,
of
and he's got the
separation.
potential. True,
He doesn't
true,
really
but
separate.
he does have the potential to be a good player if he had consistency of being healthy, right? This is a first round pick.
Lamar's got talent. I mean, there's no question. He's 45-16. He's had the monster year. He's, career 64%. Some are better, some are worse. 101 touchdowns, 38 picks. He's only 26. It's just
Right.
that he's a quarterback who's a super dynamic runner. And now he's entering the middle part of his career where he's no longer on a rookie deal. Now you got to pay him big money. And when you think about the combination of he's had injuries, you got to pay him huge money now. He's a running quarterback who's getting older, who hasn't done it in the playoffs. To me, the cost in dollars and assets to acquire him, and the questions that still exist, I would pass. I
Really?
think Lamar is a dynamic player, but I gotta think that a quarterback who runs like he does, and it's such a big part of what he does, and his value proposition is running. as he gets closer to 30, I think that he becomes a lot less dynamic.
I think he plays well enough from the pocket that there is going to be a longevity to it. He's played in a pro style offense since his second year at Louisville. And one of the always things that's been misinformation spread about Lamar Jackson is that he's somehow this off schedule player that's looking to run. The only time he really did that was his rookie year. Besides then, he's always looked to play quarterback from the pocket, and he's got a very, very quick release. He's very accurate, short and intermediate over the middle of the field. He's very good in the quick game. He's not the greatest down the field thrower, though I thought he improved in that. He's not the greatest thrower outside the numbers, though I thought he improved in that this year as well. I do think, Larry, ultimately, I agree with you in terms of if we're talking 49ers perspective, I think you're right. It may not make sense. Although
they have Brock Purdy and Trey Lance. So
right,
it's like they're
already and they don't want
to
spend money on the quarterback.
Right.
They don't want to spend money on the quarterback. That's not their team. That's not their team building direction.
And they don't have picks.
But if you're asking me, hey, this is an opportunity to get a guy who I view as a top 6, 7, 8, somewhere in there, quarterback in the NFL, I think that's where the conversation is a little bit more difficult because it's hard to get one of those guys, let alone at 26 years old. Let alone with the track record Lamar Jackson has. I understand, Larry, there's a couple more things he needs to prove to you, but not many guys have, 4 years, 5 years straight of good production while being a starting quarterback in the league. I mean, if we want to go to the wins, they win basically every regular season Lamar Jackson plays, right?
Lamar ain't going. I don't think Lamar's going anywhere.
They were 7-3.
I don't think he's going
Lamar
anywhere.
Jackson.
I think he's staying in Baltimore. Yeah, I did.
Interesting.
But also, even if he wasn't going to stay in Baltimore, it takes a certain type situation for this to work out. You have to have cap room. You have to have assets as far as draft picks. If you don't have the combination of the cap room and the draft capital, probably doesn't work. If you obviously have to have a need at quarterback. So now that's down to, anybody could upgrade to Lamar, and there's many guys that, are probably he's better than, but is their team going to get rid of their starter to upgrade, a couple spots? Probably not. So it's really, you look at the teams that have no quarterbacks and then how many of them have cap room. How many of them, I think also going with Lamar, you got to have a ready, a team that's ready to roll. Right. You don't want to trade for Lamar and then have him develop a young team and want to, have him play his best football in 3 years. I think you want to have a team that's ready to win, that just needs to climb the mountain. So in that regard, he would be a good fit for the Niners because they are at the right stage of their, whatever you want to call it, going for itness. That it makes sense for Lamar, but then they have Purdy on a rookie deal, and they got Lamar on a rookie, and they got Trey on a rookie deal, and they're looking to sign Bosa and Ayuk, and their whole plan was to operate on a rookie contract quarterback.
And that's where I think you make the golden point, right? If we're talking from a 49ers perspective, if they could get Lamar Jackson on the tag, 1 year, $32 million, and you can find a way to just fit him in this year, it's a home run, right? You feel like you get a guy who's a stud, top 10 quarterback in the league, and you put him with the most talent, right? Impulsive here. Appreciate the donation, shares with us. LJ, Lamar Jackson is carrying a team of turds. Now, I don't think that's necessarily true. I do think Baltimore has a lot of great infrastructure. Right.
Didn't they have the most Pro Bowlers 2 years ago? I think.
In 2019, they had the most Pro Bowlers.
There's a lot of good talent on that team. Come on.
There is. That's what I'm saying. I agree with you. There's a lot of good players, so I do think that. But in terms of offensive talent surrounding him, it would be a massive increase in San Francisco. I do think Baltimore's defense towards the end of the year, Niners defense was probably better last year, but Baltimore's defense towards the end of the year was a top 3, 4, 5-ish defense in the sport. They were phenomenal. In fact, if you put Lamar Jackson, I said this before the playoffs, you have a healthy Lamar Jackson on the 2023 Baltimore Ravens. They beat Cincinnati in the first round of the playoffs. They definitely go into Buffalo and beat Buffalo. and we'll see what happens with KC. Now, I don't know if they're a better overall team than Cincinnati. This year, they just had the matchup and they had Cincinnati's number with the changeup, of course, with Mac McDonald, the Michigan defensive coordinator, playing a lot more zone, right? A lot more spot drop zone, a lot less Wink Martindale bear front man coverage, and I thought that really helped them out. I do think, Larry,
I bet you they'll
the
be the
last
team that goes after Stetson Bennett now that they have Todd Monken there, because Monken was the
interesting.
Georgia OC and quarterback coach the last few years. I could see the Ravens going with Stetson Bennett in day 3.
I could see that. So somebody asked a question. We'll get to Stetson Bennett here. Our man Harvir is asking us PSG or Bayern. Can we bet against the GOAT, Larry? We cannot bet against the GOAT.
Are you
We
a
will take PSG
Premiership
tomorrow.
fan?
I am. So yeah, I love the sport of soccer. It's
Who's your
I
team?
probably Arsenal is my favorite team.
Ah,
So yeah,
good you.
it was my sport growing up, Larry. Brandon Vincent,
You
good
watch
friend of the show here.
just the Premiership, or do you watch La Liga? Do you watch?
I don't have time. I don't have time for
Okay.
that. But I watch the Premier League, mostly catch Arsenal games, and then I'll watch like the big games. You know, when you get a Manchester derby, something like that, I'll watch those in
Right.
the morning. Or you have a big game for points where City's playing for points, whatever. And then I love watching Champions League. It ruins my work schedule because around 2 o'clock on Tuesdays and Wednesdays when Champions League is there, like I have it going on my phone and I'm like typing away, but I'm also like typing away with my eyes here, watching the game, which isn't necessarily great. But Brandon Vincent asked us, Larry, he says, should the 49ers draft Stetson Bennett with one of their thirds? And I used to be completely opposed to the idea. I saw him at the combine, Larry. I thought his arm was a lot stronger than what I expected. I thought he threw it great. He didn't throw it like CJ Stroud, but I thought he looked really, really good. And he obviously ran really, really fast. And then I saw the clips of him being athletic. I've not watched him yet, so I'm now going to go and watch him. I don't know if Stetson Bennett is a third-round quarterback necessarily, but what's your take on this?
Well, should the 49ers draft Stetson Bennett? Sure. In the 3rd round? Hell fucking no. Not in the 3rd round. God, no. Stetson Bennett, he knows how to play the position. We're talking about one of the 4 finalists for the Heisman Trophy. He's played a lot of big games. By the way, you know what his full name is? Stetson Fleming Bennett the Fourth.
Wow,
Does that
that's
sound?
a name.
That's a name. His grandfather, Buddy Bennett, played quarterback at South Carolina. So,
Buddy Bennett?
Buddy Bennett.
I like that.
Buddy Bennett.
The
Back in the day. But no, I like Stetson Bennett, and I thought he looked really good at the combine, and I think he's really underrated. And I would be definitely interested in him in the 6th round, or like really, probably not in the 5th round, more like the 6th round or 7th round or after the draft. But hell no in the 3rd round. You got to be kidding me. No.
Yeah,
No.
so the third round, the other guy that looked really, really, really good throwing the ball at the combine, I thought that might be in that range, was your guy, the guy you've mentioned a few times on this show, Clayton Tune. He looked really
I like
sharp
Clayton
throwing the
Tune.
ball. I haven't watched him at all either. I did see Greg Cosell on Ross Tucker's podcast absolutely ripped up Clayton Tune. He said that when he watched him for the first 6 games of this year, he looked like a quarterback that didn't even know how to operate his own offense. I don't know the accuracy of that. Greg Cosell is obviously phenomenal at what he does, so I would take his word to the bank, but I have not watched Clayton Tune at all or in-depthly. But when I did see him at the combine, like, obviously, Larry, at the combine, it's very easy to see who can throw it and who can't. And he was spinning it.
He's athletic and he's durable. He's 220 pounds.
He's got some
He's kind
size
of
to him, too.
mobile. I like him. I like him a lot. I don't know that I don't see I see a good athlete, good size. I don't see just a polished quarterback who's ready to roll, but I see a really nice looking prospect. And I've looked at the list of quarterbacks and I watched a ton of college football. I think you're going to see 4 of them go in the first round. Um, maybe 4 in the
You
first half of the
you
first
don't
round.
think the fifth one sneaks in? Because I do think the 4 will go in the top 15, and I do think that'll cause a fifth one to sneak up higher than we think. I just don't know who that fifth guy
I think
is.
Hendon Hooker's injuries will
Right.
keep him out of the first round. And then I don't think I like McKee a lot, by the way, from Stanford. Like him a lot. But
No way
there's not a
McKee
lot of
moves well
durability
enough,
or
right?
mobility there. What's that?
Right. I was gonna say there's no way
I like
McKee.
Jaron Hall from
I
BYU.
like him too. I
He's
like him too,
athletic.
but he looked horrible in the Senior Bowl, Larry, and he's 25 years old and he's got a
Yeah.
very unpolished game, but like you said, he's got a very very live arm, very quick release, and he's got one of the better arms in the draft. The other guy you mentioned, who did you mention in between
Jake
Hooker and
Hayner.
Hall? That's my fault.
Oh, Tanner McKee.
Between Tanner McKee, I was gonna say he's way too slow footed to go in the first round. No way.
No, he's not.
I think,
But he's
yeah,
very accurate. And you're talking about a 6'6"
big guy.
quarterback who can really throw it, and he's smart. And you're talking about a guy who is, team captain, academic honor roll. You can't hold Stanford's crappiness against him. They played the slowest pace of almost anybody in all of college football. They recruited like the last few years. So I like this kid a lot.
I just finished
He's a
watching him
mature
though.
guy.
Here's
He's
my question. Oh,
married.
sorry about that.
He's a little bit older because he went on a Mormon mission. But man, if you want a pocket passer and you can protect him, you could do a whole lot worse than Tanner McKee. I mean, there's all kinds of guys around the NFL that aren't nearly like as good a thrower of the football as Tanner McKee. So
Here's my
I
question though,
like him a
Larry.
lot, actually.
In terms of the spectrum, right? Like we look at his size and his arm, right? He is big and he can throw it. My big problem is he is really slow footed.
Yeah,
And if we're talking about as a
there and not very
projected
durable.
starter, right? Yes, that too. But he's someone I just watched, and if we're talking about as a guy that possibly has a future as a starter, I think he's closer to Mike Glennon than he is to Joe Flacco because there's the lack of athleticism is a little bit scary. Like this is not Davis Mills from a couple years ago. I do think he throws it better than Davis Mills though.
Well, to me, how's he a whole lot different than Goff?
That's a fair point. That's a fair point.
I mean,
Um,
he's somewhat fragile, but he's got huge stature. He's accurate. He's smart. You know, they both are like, yeah, if you can't protect
Goff
them, they're going to be
Goff
on
had the
IR. But I
athleticism
think
though,
he's like,
right?
to me,
Goff
he's got a golf like upside. And golf went first.
Right. But Goff had the athleticism to at least be a factor on bootlegs, right? And you could run nakeds with him, right? The big play for the Rams in the 2018 playoffs, the game CJ Anderson went berserk on Dallas. Jared Goff sealed that game on what, 3rd and 10 with a 14-yard run on a naked. There's a little bit more athleticism, I would say, to Goff. I can't see Tanner McKee picking up 14 on a naked in the NFL. Do you?
No, but he's 6'6" and throws strikes. And
Yeah.
he has, I mean, you're talking about a guy that, you know, he was a 4-star recruit. I mean, we're not talking about this was one of
Right, right.
this was the nation's 3rd best pro style quarterback ranked by rivals coming out of high school. I mean, he was a really, really accomplished high school player, and he's got big stature, and he's a great kid, and he's smart, and I'll tell you, he's accurate. And this guy knows this guy can really throw the football. I mean, he can put it on you. I mean, seriously, I mean, this guy can put it right on you. Now you
Right.
got to protect him. He's not going to run. He's not a big runner, but you got to protect him. But you know what? I think I could definitely see him having success. Hayner didn't look good at the combine, but who cares, right?
Right,
It's like
right,
he's a football player. Same with Max
right.
Duggan. I mean, Max Duggan is a good football player. I
I
just
I
think
think with
Tune is a little
Hayner,
bit more upside than those guys. And
I
after watching Bennett, I liked what I saw from Bennett. And I did a breakdown on DTR. And you know what? as a late round guy, DTR is kind of intriguing to me. And then there's other guys. I kind of like Aiden O'Connell from Purdue. I kind of like Malik Cunningham. I kind of like Adrian Martinez. So
So I'm
there's
with
some
you on
interesting
the
guys.
DTR. I'm with you on the DTR, right? He's quick-footed, he's athletic. Like to me, this could be Tyrod Taylor 2.0. He's got a quick release, he's got a good arm, tons of college experience. Um, in terms of the third round, like obviously I we're nitpicking a little bit when we're talking about Tanner McKee, but I agree with your overall description of the player, of the prospect, and I wouldn't mind the 49ers necessarily using a third round pick on him. And then Hayner, I
A
agree. Hayner
third? I
didn't
don't know.
look third, fourth.
Do
So
they?
I'm talking about mid round pick, just
Oh,
something in there.
okay.
But in terms of Hayner, I agree with you. The combine wasn't maybe his strongest performance, but I also don't think the combine is necessarily a place for Jake Hayner to succeed. His game is so precise and it's so built on timing and anticipation and letting the ball go at the right time. And his ball placement is pristine. He made some ridiculous wow throws for a guy that doesn't necessarily have the strongest arm at Fresno State, just playing with unbelievable timing and placement. And I when you go to the combine, you have to work with receivers you're not necessarily comfortable with, It's more of an opportunity for the guys with the really, really special arms to show off, right? Like CJ Stroud looked outstanding because he's one of the most accurate quarterbacks I've ever seen coming out of college football. Like he was throwing the heck out of the ball. But then somebody like Hayner, whose arm strength and arm talent isn't necessarily his, the thing that he hangs his hat on that's special about his football game. The combine is kind of a difficult spot for him to really show himself. But I'm with you on Hayner. And by the way, I like Hayner. I have not watched Toon, but I like Hayner more than McKee if we're keeping track of the guys we just talked about. And I would probably slot McKee somewhere in between Hayner and then Jaron Hall and DTR. I would probably move to the day 3 conversation. I think McKee you could put day 2 possibly, depending on how these quarterbacks go and depending on how good Clayton Tune is, because I have no clue at the moment.
To me, they're all in that round 4. Like
Okay.
if you get to the 4th round, you're probably looking at Tanner McKee, Jake Hayner, Max Duggan, Clayton Tune, Jaron Hall. I think these guys are all start of day 3 guys. And then Stetson Bennett, I think, is a 6th round guy. And I think DTR is like maybe a 7th round guy. And then everybody else after that, I think, is probably going to be undrafted. I think DTR might be the last quarter. Maybe Aiden O'Connell goes in the the 7th round. Maybe somebody takes a flyer on a quarterback, but the guys I'm looking for would be, and it's, to me, it's also for the 49ers. The big question is the Brock surgery. The question is this, Vish,
Uh-huh.
if Brock if Brock is back, if he doesn't if he's back by week 1, I think I'm okay going with a rookie quarterback as my 3rd quarterback. If Brock is not going to be back until Christmas time, then I think you probably can't go with the rookie quarterback, and you probably should go with a veteran quarterback. And then you could go with a rookie quarterback, but it's got to be one of those day 3 DTR, Stetson Bennett,
Right.
something like that, day 3, as your 4th quarterback, not as, your 3rd. That's how I look at it. If Purdy's out until December, they probably need a veteran. If Purdy's going to be back, I think I would go rookie and spend my money elsewhere and save money on the veteran.
I think they should go both regardless. I don't know if there's necessarily a press to take a guy day 2 or day 3 or day excuse me, day 1 or day 2. The draft ends after day 3. That would be bad if there's no urgency there. But I do think that taking a guy day 3, whoever you like out of the guys we described, maybe it's not even a guy we talked about, but whoever you like out of there, and then signing a veteran is the way to go. They need to get competition and get people into this quarterback room regardless, because they need the 3 arms to throw this offseason, right? Because Brock Purdy, at least the very least we know about Brock Purdy is that he's not going to be throwing during the first part of the offseason and probably not during training camp. That would be my best guess based on the fact that he's having surgery in 6 months from March 10th, this Friday, which is his projected surgery, is exactly the start of week 1 of the next year. So for that, I would say, Larry, regardless, you just have to do, as I think David Lombardi uses this term, insulate the quarterback room. You've got to insulate the quarterback room. So I would say take whoever you like on day 3. Whichever one of these guys is your cup of tea, take them. Take them. It doesn't matter when, wherever. It's a quarterback. Take them. And then you sign whichever cheap veteran is your cup of tea as well. But Larry,
I don't need a veteran.
okay,
I'd be okay if Purdy's going to be healthy. I'm okay with 2 rookie quarterbacks. I'd be okay with them going Clayton Tune and DTR and going with just young quarterbacks if Purdy's healthy and ready to roll
so
at
you
the
don't
beginning
mind
of the
them
year.
taking 2 quarterbacks over getting a veteran. I see.
I'd be in favor of 2 rookie quarterbacks and using my money in other areas if I knew Purdy was going to get the shorter rehab and he'd be ready for week 1. Because the reality is, I want Brock Purdy to play, and if Brock's not ready to play, I want Trey Lance to play. I don't want to bring in a third quarterback who Shanahan may lean on because he may give him a win in September at the expense of developing Trey Lance. Let's focus here. Let's focus on what we're doing. You've got Brock Purdy. You've got Trey Lance. If you're going to have them on the roster, then you need to play them. And if Brock ain't healthy, then you play Trey. If Trey's not healthy, then you got problems. So to me, I like the idea of insulating the quarterback room, and I want only guys who can play. No more ceremonial guys. No local guys. No guys just finishing up. I want young
Ceremonial.
ascending football players, guys who I absolutely think have a future. And I really think they have they're up against it on the cap so much that spend that money elsewhere. If you, I don't, you're not winning, you're not beating anybody out for the Super Bowl with Andy Dalton. So why pay him 3.8 million or 4.2 million? Makes no sense at all. You know, go if Brock's out until December, then Andy Dalton makes sense. But if Brock's only going to be ready in 6 months, go with 2 young rookies and go spend your money on edge rushers.
So I do agree. I think, Larry, with your underlying point. Um, but I will say, even if Brock Purdy returns after 6 months, a lot would depend on where he is physically. And I do think a veteran is needed because while Brock Purdy was able to back up Trey Lance this year, and the 49ers were willing to do that before they found the or so they claim, before Jimmy Garoppolo came back. We don't know what really would have happened, but we can go off of their word, which was that Brock Purdy would have simply just been their backup. I also think now we're realizing, and we got to see it, 8 games into the season, that Brock Purdy had something special about him for a young guy, right? We don't see a lot of late round picks play at the level he played at. And I do think there's a level of trust that may not be there for another rookie quarterback, that perhaps having a veteran there would be good. But Larry, I think Randall Riley brings up a good point. You and I have transitioned this conversation from Lamar to a third quarterback talk, and we have spent a lot of time there, and perhaps we can come back to it. But I did not want to keep you for too long today. I know we usually do the 2 hours, but I would like to tell everybody in here who's watching, by the way, like and subscribe. Please like and subscribe to the Krug Show as well. That you were up at 5:30 a.m. this morning. And the reason I know this is when I was going to work at 7:30, I sent you a text like, hey, can we do our usual show? And you responded immediately at 5:30 a.m. And then I immediately felt like a surge of guilt. Like, I've been holding Larry Krueger, who already streams 15 times a day. I've been holding him for 2 hours here, and then he's got to get up at 5:30 a.m. and we go pretty late into the night Central Time, and even we go pretty late into the night Pacific Time. So I want to bring a new game to our show that I wanted to play with you. That's a little different and a little away from the quarterback talk.
All right.
And it's called Free Agency or Draft. The 49ers have a few needs that they need to.
Okay.
The 49ers have a few needs that they need to address this offseason, okay? I think you and I have talked ad nauseum about what those needs are. In fact, I think you were the first to point out a couple of those needs mid-season, like tight end 2, for an example, that a lot of people weren't necessarily talking about. This draft is uniquely deep at certain positions, but also doesn't have a lot of good players in some positions. This free agency similarly is uniquely deep at some positions and doesn't have a lot. The Niners have this unique blend of resources where they have enough cap to get a couple bites at the apple during free agency, depending on how they manage it and who they go after. And then they have enough draft picks to draft a few players that might be able to make an immediate impact or compete to make an immediate impact. So I want to go through the list of what I deem are the 49ers needs, and I want you to tell me whether you would address that need in free agency or the draft. So let's start with one that you already basically answered in the previous topic, and that's, the depth of the quarterback room. Would you answer that in free agency or the draft? I think you just answered that. You would answer it in the draft, right?
Draft.
Okay, perfect. Let's go to the next one. Tight end 2.
Tight end, well, definitely draft. But there's always a couple of, I think, kind of sleeper tight ends, and this year's no different. And to me, I look at like Robert Tonyan from Green Bay as a really kind of underrated tight end that could flourish in the 49ers system.
Right, I agree.
Then, even though Mercedes Lewis is 38, if you're going to have a second tight end and you're going to run the ball as much as the Niners do, why wouldn't you want an elite blocking tight end? And Mercedes Lewis is an elite blocking tight end.
Think
Then there's always, as a personnel guy, I always have like my eye on one or two players that I think are, let's just say I think are better than they've played thus far, and thus they're good value. And I think they're like the two guys for me are Adam Shaheen, who played with the Bears and now is in Miami. He's a monster-sized tight end. He's only 28. He's cheap. And Josh Oliver, who played at San Jose State, who played for the Ravens behind Isaiah Likely. I think he's kind of solid as well. Both those guys, I think, would be underrated pickups. So, but that all being said, I like the this year's crop of draft tight ends a lot. And so Michael Mayer, to me, is one of the greatest tight ends I've seen. I would do anything in my power to try to add him because I'm that convinced he's a monster. And then Darnell Washington just made one of the greatest one-handed catches I think I've ever seen. I watched tons of Utah, so I know Dalton Kincaid is a player. I watched tons of Iowa, and their offense is just brutal, but Sam Laporta is not the reason why. He's terrific. I watched Purdue quite a bit this year. Payne Durham is a tremendous receiver. The Old Dominion 6'8" tight end had incredible workout numbers. Zach Kuntz. The Michigan tight end, Schoonmaker, is a horse, and he's a tremendous player in the run game. So I like all those guys. And there's even a couple more after that I kind of like. I kind of like Daniel Barker out of Michigan State.
Larry, I got to call you out a little bit. I asked
Christian
you draft
Sims.
or free agency, and you've said draft and free agency for this
one.
Well,
there's a couple draft guys. There's a couple free agents I like, but no, this undoubtedly draft. Tight end, draft.
I 100% agree with you on this one. I didn't think of Mercedes Lewis. That's a really, really good thing to bring up because in 2019, the 49ers, that was the first year they kept 4 tight ends under Kyle Shanahan. And the surprise to make the roster that year, if you remember, was Levine Toilolo. And they used Levine Toilolo a lot that year before he got hurt as a blocking tight end. And he was actually quite good for them. And he used whatever he did for the 49ers to parlay into a multi-year deal with the Giants in that free agency. And Mercedes Lewis would be the first replacement they've had for that. Perhaps they drafted Charlie Warner with a blocking tight end type thing in mind, and he's been inconsistent at times. He's been really a mauler and a dominant blocker, and at times he hasn't been. But I agree with you on the draft. Ultimately, this is one of the deepest tight end classes I've seen in a while. Like, there's a lot of really, really good players. I haven't studied any of them, but people say there's a lot of really, really good players, and I saw them test at the combine. There were some great numbers. But to the next position, Larry. There's two free agent openings right in the 49ers offensive line. The first being center. Would you address center in free agency or the draft?
Ooh, neither. I like the internal candidates. I
Okay.
like Poe and I like Zakel, and I don't see I mean I like the kid from Penn State quite a bit, but I still would try to I think I'm doing center on the cheap.
Okay.
I'm not going to try to spend money in free agency, and I'm not really. I don't see. I mean, I kind of liked Rodney Hudson, but he decided to retire. Obviously, Jason Kelsey's tremendous, but he's 35. The Niners have had a bunch of different centers every single year, so I guess if I had to say one or the other, I would probably say the draft. But I personally, I kind of think that like I love the Minnesota center, John Michael Schmitz.
Right.
Think he's terrific, and I love the Michigan center, Oluwatimi. I think he's really good, and I
Yeah.
like Forsyth a lot from Oregon, and Scruggs a lot from Penn State. Probably the guy that makes the most sense to me would be day 3, going for Juice Scruggs as
Okay.
a draft pick. That's the guy that I would probably draft. But there's a chance if I really loved everything about Oluwatimi that I would consider him in the 3rd round. Because to me, that's right where he's going to go. It's going to be late 3rd round. And he won the Outland Trophy. He's really powerful at the point. He's 310. He could really do a nice job of neutralizing the middle and keeping bodies off of Brock Purdy or Trey Lance. So yeah, my 2 favorites are Oluwatimi from Michigan and Scruggs from Penn State.
Okay, that's good to know because I'm nowhere close on offensive linemen or centers, and I probably won't reach that by draft time. And so if they take one, I'm going to be remembering the Michigan center and the Penn State center, and then
Yep.
calling up Larry Krueger and asking him to give me a quick scouting report on them. But I agree with you. I'm actually also a little bit more positive, maybe on the internal candidates, um, than a few. I think I would bring back Jake Brendel. I don't like the idea of the free agent centers. I'm not a big Garrett Bradbury fan. He's an okay player, decent scheme fit, but depending on the money he gets. Same thing with Jake Brendel. Like, I'm okay with bringing Brendel back if the money's right, right? Because Chris Forrester is Brendel's big believer. He's the reason Brendel's here and all of that. And so if the money is right, 100%. But if Brendel gets a little bit expensive because he was a Pro Bowl alternate this year, I would ride with one of the young guys. And I think the 49ers are well coached enough, and there's enough talent with those young guys where they might not be perfect to start the year, but we would see a drastic improvement the way we saw with Burford, we saw with Banks over the course of them being able to play and them being able to play next to um what would be young players, but Banks, I guess, is going into his 3rd year, so he's starting to get a little bit older. Right tackle, Larry, free agency or draft?
Draft. Draft. Another spot where I mean it's just a right tackle is a really, really tough spot to fill. Um, I don't think I would sign McGlinchey. But at the same time, look at the options at right tackle. I mean, what's out there? Billy Turner, that doesn't excite
Yeah.
me. Jawan Taylor, okay, he's decent.
Bad fit though,
Um,
right? Because he's excellent in pass protection, which he is, but slow feet and he's bad in the run game. Niners wouldn't. That's not their cup of tea at right tackle, right? They let Trent
yeah,
Brown go, who was that cup of tea.
I personally, there's a couple offensive tackles that I really like in
Wiley,
this
right?
draft. Blake Freeland, I
Okay.
think I would invest one of those 3rd round picks in Blake Freeland. I don't think he's going to be there, but I would invest that 3rd round pick in him. DeJuan Jones from Ohio State is 6'8", 375, and really moves very, very well. I think there's a chance that he's there late in the
Okay.
2nd round. Bergeron from Syracuse, I think is a good player. Jalen Duncan from Maryland, I think he's a good player. But my favorite tackle in the entire draft um, is the Illinois offensive tackle Alex Paljewski,
Oh,
whose parents immigrate from Poland. And this guy like had 65 career collegiate starts. He didn't allow a sack all this year, has played right guard and right tackle. really smart kid. He's from Mount Prospect, Illinois. He was
I
the
know where that
team
is.
captain. He was a 2-time bowl captain. And he finished his career at that with the Illini going 117 snaps, consecutive snaps without allowing, or 170 consecutive snaps without allowing a sack.
Let me ask you this. Where is he projected to go?
Day three.
Day
Day three.
3.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's say somehow his projection moves up, and let's say he's sitting there bottom half, maybe, let's say you're sitting there bottom of the second round. And look, I don't know what the tackle class is like. I haven't looked into it at all. So I'm asking this question completely blank. It could be a stupid question, but let's say there's a tackle, Larry, that you really like. If you're the 49ers in that situation, are you going to trade a couple picks, try to get yourself into the second round to go get a right tackle? Or do you have belief in the guy down below, Colton McKivitz, right here, that MFS us?
I mean, this is the prospect I like, and I think he'll be on the board, maybe in the 4th round.
Okay.
This kid wrestled for 4 years. He's an athlete. He was on the track and field team. He was a water polo team guy. Um,
What about
he's,
in the case that perhaps this guy's stock explodes or there's a tackle the 49ers really like? Um, I don't know if this hypothetical necessarily makes sense, but the point is, what if there's a tackle that the 49ers feel is going to be gone at the end of the second round, but there's perhaps maybe an opportunity to go get him? Would you be aggressive in making that move is basically what I'm asking.
yeah,
Did that make
yeah, I
sense?
would. I
Okay.
would. And to me, those guys would be like Dawan Jones, Blake Freeland, Matthew Bergeron, Jalen Duncan, Darnell Wright. Those
Okay.
are the 5 guys I would say. Freeland, Jones, Wright, Bergeron, Duncan. I bet you those are the 5 guys. Ryan Hayes is from Michigan. He's an interesting player too. I kind of liked Wanya Morris, but he got hurt at the combine. TJ Bass is not a bad player, but my favorite tackle prospect is Palzewski from the Illini, and I think they could probably get him in the 5th round. That'll be my
Okay.
guess, but I would probably go for him in the 4th round if they liked him as much as I do.
Okay, so in the case that you can get a tackle that way, I would trade up for him. But honestly, Larry, I can't see a right tackle. When you get out of the top 10, top 15, top 20 with the right tackles, you're really going to draft, what's more of a scheme fit rather than who's really the special athlete. Because if you're finding those special guys at right tackle that are like big and they're naturally quick footed and whatever, those guys, no matter, the experience, like I remember Colton Miller, same year as Mike McGlinchey, right? There were some issues with Colton Miller. There were some play strength issues too. But the fact that he was so naturally big and so naturally athletic, he went in the top 15 picks. He's a really good player now, but those guys naturally tend to go earlier. I actually have a lot of belief in Colton McKivitz. My belief has grown. I was watching randomly the week 17 game from last year. I thought he played very well. I go back to what you taught me, Larry, which is if the guy is smart and he's physical and he's willing to be physical, he's a good player on the offensive. And to me, that epitomizes who Colton McKivitz is. He's not the world's greatest athlete. He's not, the most physically gifted guy, but he's smart, he's assignment sound, and he's physical. I do think they should take a tackle in the draft as well, bring some competition to the position, but I think ultimately McKivitz will win out. And I do think, Larry, also, I have a prediction with this. I think the 49ers will give uh, Colton McKivitz a multi-year deal this offseason. He's I think he's a restricted free agent. I think they'll do what they did to Emmanuel Mosley a couple years ago, where they gave him a 2-year, $10 million deal because he was a prospective starter. He obviously ended up outplaying that deal over the last 2 years when he did play and wasn't hurt, but it was an absolute steal and a bargain for the 49ers, and this was his last year of being a restricted free agent. I think they do the same thing actually with Colton McKivitz. I think it makes a lot of sense. I think he's going to play well, and I do think they draft a guy. I'm with you. I'm not a big fan of the veteran market. I don't know if there's a guy that really makes sense, especially when we're talking about how cap strapped the 49ers are. But I also don't know if there's a young guy that you're going to pick in the 3rd, 4th, 5th round that's going to beat this guy out, because he's, again, like I mentioned, he's physical and he's smart. And that's going to be tough to beat out, especially when he has system familiarity and he's good in the run game. And so I think he's going to surprise a lot of people. And my big prediction is that the 49ers do give him a multi-year deal, because the worst case scenario, even if he doesn't start, he's a good backup at 4 different positions, right? He brings guard tackle versatility, and he's a guy you can suit up every single game day because of that. And I think that's important to have in a backup offensive line. And obviously, when you're only carrying 9 and you're suiting up 8 on game day, you need those 3 backups to be extremely positionally versatile. So I'm actually a big fan of Colton McKivitz. I do like the names you mentioned. I wish I had a little more context and knowledge on those names. I don't. Um, Besides what you shared, but I do think there's a lot of reasons to be positive about the prospects of Colton McKivitz, especially at the value that he's going to be at. I think that's the biggest thing, right? He's not an outright better player than Mike McGlinchey, but when you're talking about Mike McGlinchey for 13, 14, $15 million annually, and you're talking about Colton McKivitz for $2-3 million annually, I think there's going to be a massive difference. And I think he's going to play quite well next year. That's just my big prediction. What are your thoughts on that before we move to the the defensive side of draft or free agent?
I love Colton McKivitz. I will say this: I'd be totally fine handing the reins over to Colton McKivitz and drafting somebody. Nick Devery from Old Dominion, I think, is a day 3 sleeper at tackle. And there's a couple more, but yeah, I like the kid from Illinois. But I will say this about the free agent market: there's a couple of sleeper free agents that I think are young guys who have potential. Yosh Neiman, who played right tackle
Green
for the
Bay.
Pack. Yeah, I like him a lot. He's 27. He didn't make a lot of money. I think he's strong at the point. Yeah, I think he played at Vatech. He's 6'7", about 320, and he's played the right side, and he's not old. He didn't make a lot of money, and he came out of a good system where they teach offensive line play. And I kind of like him. I kind of like the guy from Minnesota, Oli
So,
Udo,
real quick on Josh Neiman, not to interrupt you, but if anybody remembers, he started week
against the
3 of
Niners.
last year at left tackle when Green Bay beat the 49ers in Santa Clara. And I remember going into that game, a lot of people felt like, hey, that was a game Nick Bosa, who had a very strong start to the season, had a sack. I think he had a couple of sacks, actually, between the Detroit and the Philadelphia game. And he ended up holding up really well in that game. I think Nick Bosa only had a couple pressures and a couple sacks. He ended up actually playing pretty much okay. So just some context on him. That's the only game of him I've watched in my life. And so I just rememred that. Go ahead on the Minnesota guy, my bad.
Caleb McGarry is the other one. I mean, but he's, McGarry, you have to pay a lot more. But I think Josh Neiman Neiman, I think, for Green Bay would be kind of an interesting candidate. And that's if you liked McKivitz and you thought McKivitz could do it, but you wanted to, give yourself another, experienced offensive tackle who, he only made $540,000 last year. Also, I'll tell you, coming out in the draft, I kind of like Trey Pipkins, who's, only 26 for the Chargers. Played at Sioux Falls, and he's kind of a developmental player, but I've seen him. I saw him when he first came into the league, and I saw him last year. I thought he was improved. So I think the arrow is pointing up on Pipkins. He's not quite the power player that Yash is, but both those guys are interesting to me.
They're interesting to me too, especially because we're talking about young guys who have played a reasonable amount of football in their young career, but also are developmental. I don't know if those guys come in necessarily and beat out a Colton McKivitz either, but it's always good to bring in some level of competition, right? Especially when you are looking to find a starter. The more guys you have to choose from, I definitely agree with that. Impulsive, kind enough to donate again. We really appreciate it. By the way, I do want to add before we answer this question and go to the defensive side of draft or free agency with Larry Krueger, please do subscribe. Please do like. Please do share. Please do comment down below. And please do like and subscribe to Larry Krueger as well. The Krug Show. I tagged him in the title. But I'm sure all of you are doing that anyway. That's probably why you're here in the first place. But hey, that's why we bring Larry on, so he can add all the viewers to the show. But Impulsive asks, there is no plan to develop Trey anymore. He's either good or he's gone. If they can get lucky with late round rookies or vets, why wait on this guy?
Well, I mean, why? Because he's on your team and you've invested a lot in him, and to divest yourself of him as an asset, you would almost assuredly do so at a loss. Is that not enough reasons right there? I mean, you invested. I mean, it's like anything else. Hey, I bought this. It's like, let's talk about it. I bought this Lamborghini. Oh, you know what? And I've been busy with work and traveling, and I've barely driven it. And I've driven it a couple times, and it's all right, but it's not quite as great as I thought it would be. I bought it for 300 grand. I'm thinking about selling it for 50K. What do you think? I think you're kind of an idiot. I mean, I think you devalued the asset and now you're trying to pawn it off. It doesn't sound like you've made very good decisions. And maybe we'll send a town car for you next time we're playing poker because you don't make good financial decisions. It's like, you know what I'm saying? So it's like, why not move Trey? Because look what you paid and the sunken cost fallacy. You have to have a reasonable amount of patience. I mean, look at the Warriors. Are the Warriors better off today because James Wiseman's in Detroit? No, they're nominally better if they're at all better right now. So, and in the future, there's potential for them to look terrible on that trade. And as bad as the Warriors potentially can look, the Niners could look equally bad, if not worse, by trading Trey Lance. So I would be deathly afraid to Trey Lance for any price because I really believe in him. But you have to decide, Trey also has a say in his career, and you don't know what's going on behind the scenes. For all we know, behind the scenes, his agent is like, Trey either wins this competition with Brock or he's got to be elsewhere.
Right.
And we want to be elsewhere before October 20th. You know what? Then you're John Lynch. And then what do you do? So there's more to these jobs than meets the eye. Lynch could be under all kinds of different forms of pressure that we're totally unaware of, that he's just, behind the scenes having to kind of make it all come together. So there's a lot of moving parts and a lot of time. Maybe there's no moving parts. Maybe Trey and his agent and his family are like, we're here. We don't care. We'll be here if we win. We'll be here if we lose. We're here. Maybe they're in that mode. So who knows? We really don't know.
Yeah, I think you summed it up pretty much perfectly. And I'll ask the question I've asked on every stream I've been on in the last 2 weeks. How can we get here after 4 games? It's not possible. Yeah. It's 4 games, man. 4 games.
Let's not even 4 games. Not even 4 games. Really. It's not 4 games.
Right.
It's really, the first game was I don't know what you want to call that, but we'll say that's a game. The second game against Houston was a legitimate game.
Yeah.
The third game was really half a game, and the fourth game was 2 series.
You're right. The Seattle half is like
a couple series,
right? And then the 2 series in week 2 is almost nothing. So really, we have the Texans game, the Cardinals game, which was his first start on the road against a team that was undefeated at the time, playing really, really good football. And then finally, we have the Bears game, which is one of the worst experiences I've had in my life. Sitting there in that rain. God, Larry. God, I spent so much money too. Side note, it was my sister's birthday. Now that I'm the employed man, Larry, I wanted to do something nice. Bought us some nice tickets.
Was it cold rain or was it warm rain?
It was cold rain.
It was
cold rain.
It was early in the year, colder. Though.
Yeah, but it was cold that day for whatever reason. It was like 40 degrees, 50 degrees. And it was cold rain, Larry, that got even colder as I watched my hope and sorrow just drown away with the Niners losing. And to losing of all, Larry, I can stomach a loss better than anybody. I just can't stomach one to the Chicago Bears. Gosh, I hate that team. Like, I despise the Chicago Bears. And it was horrible. It was horrible. It was wet. It was cold. And the Bears fans, right? They'll sit through anything. They get a couple Miller Lights in the system, and they're all ready to go singing "Bear Down, Chicago Bears," and they're just going on and on and on right behind me, whatever. and I'm sitting there getting drenched, getting soaked. My phone has no battery. I can barely see what's going on in front of me. It's so rainy. I'm shin deep underwater with my legs. I know I sound like a big diva right now, but all of these things would have been okay if the 49ers won the game. All of these things would have been okay if the 49ers did not lose the game. And so, yeah, it was a horrible experience. And people really expect me to evaluate a guy throwing the football in those conditions. Like, as Mark Pfeiffer said, as you said earlier in the show, you, as Bill Parcells coined the phrase, you are what your record says you are. But part of the reason you and I are here is to provide context, analysis, and you provide the analysis, but I guess provide context, analysis towards why you are what your record says you are. And in the case of Trey Lance, like I don't even get it. And plus, I don't even like Scotch is bringing up the trade, right? Like from a financial perspective, unless it's the scenario you described, which is the moving parts behind the scenes that we have no clue about, which is that Trey Lance wants out, which we have no inclination to feel that at right now at this
He's
moment.
actually said the opposite.
Right. I was just about to bring that up. He said the opposite in the Rich Eisen interview. There's absolutely zero like benefit for the 49ers to trade him right now, especially because they have no healthy quarterbacks and he's the only one possibly to be healthy before the start of the offseason and being under contract because Brock Purdy won't be healthy at the start of the offseason. So yeah, I don't get it at all. But we got to go back to free agency or draft with Larry Krueger. By the way, I did want to add this. Tom Jensen did comment below free agent right tackle for Andre Dillard. This is one I've gone back and forth with because the potential of the player intrigues me a lot. He's a talented guy.
Well, what about him? I mean, I, you know, it hasn't worked out. They invested a first round pick in him. It's not like you can blame him for not beating out Lane Johnson, but Mailata on the other side, I think was a little bit of a surprise. But Mailata is such a monster. I don't know. I'd be a little, to me, if you haven't played this, maybe he's not. Maybe there's something there. Maybe there's an issue there that we're not aware of. I don't think it's just, oh, well, Philly's stacked and he's awesome, except no, I get the sense that he's maybe not a glass cutter. Maybe he's not a super, 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 maybe he doesn't love to play, or maybe he's not the toughest guy. I don't know what his situation is, but if you're a first round pick, they're going to find a place to get you on the field if you can play. And he's a first round pick and he can't get on the field.
Yeah. So this is, oh, my bad.
I don't like him. I mean, I like him as far as a size, speed prospect, but it's well beyond when he should have already delivered.
So I agree with you on the prospect part, but that's actually a really, really interesting point because I had not considered that. But you're right. Like, even if he is a tackle and you feel like Lane Johnson and Mailata are better tackles than him, if he's really, really good, you find a way to play him at guard. You find a way to get him on the field, right? The Niners played 6'8" Alex Boone at guard in 2013. He played right guard for them. And it was about getting your 5 best players in terms of offensive linemen on the field, right? Like Alex Boone is probably the biggest guard in terms of height or the tallest, longest guard I've ever seen in my life, but he played guard. And so I agree with you. That's a very, very interesting point, right? When you're settling for, Amani, I'm not even going to bother with the name. The Eagles right guard, current right guard from the Panthers, Amani Solitalu. So I'm so sorry. I can't pronounce the name properly. But the point is when you're settling for that at right guard, and he's a solid player, but certainly Andre has a tad more physical talent. That's interesting. I hadn't considered that. But Larry, we got to go back to free agency or draft, defense edition. Edge rusher, free agency or draft. What are you doing?
Have you noticed a theme? I'm going draft more times than not because I really believe in building through the draft. But there's always a player here or there that would get me to change my mind. I definitely think in this situation, the Niners have 3 guys between Ebukam, Amenahue, and Jordan Willis. One of those three guys has to come back. They have to retain one of those guys. So that probably would be Jordan Willis because he's the cheapest. But other than that, this is edge rusher is probably my favorite spot in this draft, and there's just no way I would want to clog. To me, I would every mock draft I've done so far for the Niners has them drafting like 4 different edge rushers. That's how much I like this class. I mean, seriously, the guys at the top are blue chip, right? Will Anderson, Tyree Wilson, Miles Murphy, Nolan Smith, incredible athletes, all going in the top 20. Will McDonald from Iowa State, crazy athlete. I love him. Right. Isaiah Foskey from Notre Dame, love him. Zach Harrison from Ohio State is a total blue chipper. Should have been better with the Buckeyes than he was, but still,
high recruit.
Still, though, you're talking about a guy who's just the prototype. Derek Hall from Auburn, awesome. I mean, tremendous player. Byron Young from Tennessee. Andre Carter from the second from Army. Love him. Jose Ramirez from Eastern Michigan, my favorite edge rusher in the entire draft. Yaya Diaby from Louisville. Crazy athlete. Look at his workout numbers from Indy. And there's more. Thomas Incoom from Central Michigan. Love him. Ali Gay from LSU. Tyrus Wheat from Mississippi State. Cade Hall from San Jose State. DJ Johnson from Oregon. I mean, this thing is stacked with all kinds of guys who can play. The Rice kid, Akena Anekchuo, is a player. Brevin Allen from Campbell. I saw a film on him this week, and I was like, what? Brevin Allen from some school called Campbell? I mean, you gotta look at this guy. I mean, this guy's really something else. He's 6'4", 265. He's got ridiculously long arms. He's explosive off the edge. I mean, really explosive. So,
so is this your Charles Haley find right here?
I love him. Brevin Allen from
I'll check him out.
Where Campbell.
Campbell, you said Campbell.
Sorry,
Campbell, like Campbell's Chunky Chicken Noodle Soup and Jason Campbell. But Larry just muted himself, so I'll just be, I guess, filling the conversation. Oh, there he is. There we go.
Like this, and I knocked my headphones out of my microphone.
Oh, Larry, you saw my mic, did the old at the beginning of the show. These things happen. The one question I do want to ask you,
but edge rusher's loaded. It's loaded, and look at the money you're going to pay these guys in free agency. I mean, and that's not even all of them. I mean, there's other guys here that are incredible players. The guy from Northwestern, Adetomiwa Adebare, is 6'2", 285.
Yeah, he was the biggest freak show at the combine.
Oh my God, he's absolutely incredible. So I mean, there's a lot of good defensive linemen. Dawan Johnson from Toledo, Jason Adamilola from Notre Dame. I mean, these guys might be more tackles than ends. Can you
expand on why you like Jose Ramirez so much, please?
Yeah, I can. Jose Ramirez played at the same school as Max Crosby, and he was a tremendously productive football player. And then if you go look at his East-West Shrine game, he had a highlight play in that game where he's rushing from the right defensive end spot, and he beats the left tackle, and then he flattens to the quarterback in a way that at an angle that I don't know that I've even seen from Bosa. I mean, this guy had just the most incredible agility to flatten to the quarterback. One of the most impressive moves I've seen in years. Okay. Then I looked more at his college film. He's a very mature player. He's a grad student. He was a preseason All-MAC selection. Phil Steele had him on his preseason All-American list. And then when you watch the combine, I'm looking for that crazy 3-cone, and he did. He had the best 3-cone of any defensive lineman, I believe, at the entire combine. So he's a little undersized, but his ability to flatten to the quarterback is special. I mean,
Is
really
it
special. And
what's the
and
ability
they have him
compared
in
to
the fifth
Hassan
round.
Reddick? I was looking at his physical profile, right? He's got similar body to Hassan Reddick. How would you say he compares athletically?
I think he's a little stronger than Hassan Reddick. Hassan Reddick might be a little faster than this
Uh-huh.
guy, but I love this player. He wore 55. He comes flying off the edge. I think in a year with proper coaching and the right scheme, opposite Bosa, I think this could be a dominant player. Now, I still want to. He's probably a little on the light side. I mean, the Niners like guys closer to 270s, guys more like closer to 250. But so and he needs some functional strength. But as far as a guy, a day three, defensive end who can play in that wide nine in a rotation. Yeah, there's no doubt I'm taking that guy. I mean, he's absolutely can play for me any day of the week. He's a little on the short side. They'd rather him be 6'5" than 6'2".
You know who his physical profile just reminded me of?
A
And
little
I'll
bit like
actually
D
see if
Ford.
he's like this player. No, not D Ford, because D Ford was 6'3", 245.
Well, this guy's 6'2",
He was just a
242.
he was listed at 6'1", 241.
Oh, okay.
But either way, I don't know because I haven't watched him. I'll take your word for it. But I got like C.O. Moore vibes when I read his physical profile. You remember him? The
Yeah, for the
Raiders had
Raiders. I
C.O.
liked him
Moore.
too. I liked him.
He had a couple of seasons early in his career with a few sacks. I don't even know if that's actually even a valid comparison in terms of how they play. I just saw the physical profile and I was reminded of that guy randomly. The one thing I will say, Larry, is you said a lot and you mentioned a lot of names in there. The point is that the edge rusher class, not only in the draft, but in free agency, is loaded. It's loaded. There's so many different guys in free agency that can be impact pass rushers. And because the edges and look at that. Come on. How about those hands, Krug? You missed it. I caught the mic again. Come on. But what I was saying was, I do think that a lot of guys are going to be cheaper than expected in free agency because teams are going to be scared about overpaying, knowing there's such good value in the draft. I mean, I haven't studied any of them. I remember asking you about Will Anderson a little bit and stuff like that. I'll get to that pretty soon. But the one thing I did notice is watching the combine is there were a lot of guys who tested otherworldly on the defensive line. And it wasn't just the Will Andersons and the Tyree Wilsons, right? There was just names where guys were just
Elijah Cansey.
right. I mean, talk about a freak show. That was freak show and a half. That was
And
like
he's a
Aaron
player.
Donald. Right. Dude, so he's one of the players I turned on simply because of the Aaron Donald comps. I don't think the Aaron Donald comps are fair. Like he's not Aaron Donald. He's
No,
more like
nobody
Grady
is.
Jarrett, perhaps. But dude, you want to talk about a player who just kicks ass on film? Kalijah Clancy. Every
Very
play.
safe. Very
Every
safe
play.
player.
That dude kicks ass. And so, yeah, I 100% agree. But the point is, there's so much depth. I think this is one they can address actually a little bit of both. They already have an advantage because Drake Jackson is kind of like a young rookie player for them next year because he didn't play a lot this year. And there's unlimited potential to Drake Jackson. And I think he's a guy that the NFL offseason is going to do a lot of help to, right? Because there were issues for him with the attrition of the season overall near the end of the year. That's why they had him inactive and played Michael Dwuffer. But
Who played well?
now that and now that they're there, I think, Larry, they can get two bites at the apple. I think they can get a guy who's pretty good for very cheap in this free agency just because there's so many available edge rushers, both in free agency and the draft. And I think teams are going to be a little hesitant about overpaying, just knowing that you might be able to nab somebody in the draft. So I do think this market, because of all the names, is going to move slower. I don't know if this is the kind of market that, as much as I would like the 49ers to grab a Yannick Ngakoue that would make a massive difference, I don't know if this is the market that you necessarily need to go do that. I think there's going to be 1 year deal type guys available that can be immediate impact pass rushers. Maybe you can bring back an Ebukam for cheap because the market is so loaded. And he's obviously a terrific player against the run, and he's a pretty good pass rusher when healthy. And then, like you said, there's names after names after names of guys that have. John Wardle is also mentioning my other name. Thank God he reminded me. I wanted to mention this. There's always Marcus Davenport. I wonder what his market is going to be. When you talk about talent, like in terms of a guy that the 49ers could get on a 1-year prove it deal that could be like a game changing special player, Larry, if he's able to stay healthy. I know the injuries are a concern, but it's kind of like a perfect fit in the glove, right? Because I don't know if Marcus Davenport has necessarily proven enough to get a big contract, but he's also proven to me enough that we know he's a damn good player. And you bring him to a team like the 49ers with all the talent they have on defense, and you put him on the other side of a Nick Bosa, you might not be able to sign him long term, but you might be able to get a 1-year kind of special year of production that could parlay into Davenport possibly getting a bigger contract elsewhere. So there's another great name. But I think I would get 2 bites at the apple on this one. Next question, Larry.
Let me throw one other guy out there.
Go ahead.
Zach Allen. Zach Allen has to be thrown out. I think Zach Allen you could take him away from Arizona. He's played well against the Niners.
Do you think he plays inside or outside, though?
What's that?
Do you think he plays inside or outside? Because he played kind of as like a 5 technique in their 3-4 defense, right?
I think that he's a guy that you can play him off the edge in a 4-3. I think he could play in a 3. I think he's more ideally suited to an edge player in a 4-man line than a 5 technique in a 34 front. So that's how I see him. I don't think he's strong enough or powerful enough to really play as a first and second down player in a 3-4. I like him more as lean him out, get him fast as possible, maybe drop a little bit of body fat and put him opposite Bosa and capitalize on his motor, because the motor is just relentless and he's a super tough guy. So that's the guy. And there's a lot of guys who take the money and run, man. I mean, there's some guys who, get paid, they secure the bag, and then it's like they lose all desire. The other guy that I kind of like Leonard Floyd, who's in Chicago, who's with the Rams. And to me, Leonard Floyd is a difference maker off the edge. And I'd really love to see them get, especially if they're going to have some issues inside, you got to have somebody opposite Bosa who threatens the edge to make your interior guys a little bit more valuable and a little bit more freed up. And I think that Leonard Floyd is the perfect build to keep it. I mean, I think he was a late bloomer coming out of Georgia, and I don't think he necessarily fulfilled his potential with the Bears. He started to with the Rams. I like him. I think he would be a really nice get.
And the thing about Floyd is he's a complete football player. That's the thing that gets forgotten, right? He was a late bloomer as a pass rusher, but once he came to the Rams and early on with the Bears, he showed an ability to play as the overhang defender in Vic Fangio's scheme. So that, includes dropping into coverage, which he actually did decently well. And he's a very good player against the run. That's another great name there, Larry. I do want to speed this up a little bit because I talked so loudly about how I didn't want to keep you for 2 hours, and it's already an hour and 27 minutes in. So let's try and finish this show with the great game that I've invented here, which is free agency or draft. And Larry Krueger, next question for you. Defensive tackle, another position of need for the 49ers that, you were one of the first people to start pointing out. I would like to take credit for this one as well. I've been pointing this one out since the Atlanta game. That was the big game when no Kinlaw and Armstead, if I may as well pat myself on the back here. Thank you very much. But no, in all seriousness, jokes aside, you were somebody that's been talking about this from the beginning. But again, free agency or draft. Are you going to say draft again? Because we're running out of picks here, Larry. We got to address something in free agency.
Yeah, I think I'm going here in free agency because, the bottom line is there's a few guys in the draft who have potential to be good run stuffers, but stopping the run is not something that, I take lightly. I think it's a major part of what you do. I like David Onyemata from the Saints. I like Michael Brockers, David Onyemata. I like I don't like Michael Brockers.
You like Michael Brockers?
I wouldn't be adverse to Son Ridgeway coming back. And then down the list, I kind of like Colin Saunders from Kansas City, and I like Poona Ford a lot from Seattle. And those are the guys that I would be, and I would definitely trade Javon. And the other guy that I think is a real good fit for the Niners is Ioannidis, who played for the Niners defensive coordinator in Carolina this last year, Wilkes, had Ioannidis. So Ioannidis I loved him coming out of the draft, and
Right.
he played at Temple, and he's just a brawler. He's tough. He's got a motor. He's a little, but I mean, to me, Ioannidis, Onyemata, Ashawn Robinson is the guy I was thinking of. Ioannidis, Onyemata, Ashawn Robinson, Poona Ford. I'd like to have one of those guys in free agency.
Ashawn Robinson and Michael Brockers is a fair one to mix up, right? Two SEC defensive linemen. Brockers went to LSU. Robinson went to Alabama. Two guys who have both played for both the Rams and the Lions, right? Those were the two teams Brockers has most famously played for. And, of course, similar with our other guy there, Ashawn Robinson.
Who was great against the Niners. I mean, I'm a little biased because of that, but also Ashawn Robinson is 5 years younger. See, I like Brockers 5 years ago, but now if Brockers is coming up on 33, Ashawn's coming up on 28. That's a big difference. And Ashawn seems like to be the kind of guy that the Niners might be able to really get some great play out of. He's versatile. I think the Niners need that anchor guy. They got to have that one guy that you just cannot move. It was DJ. Before that, it was Buckner, and they haven't had that. So to me, Ioannidis would be nice. Onyemata would be nice. Poona would be really nice. Ashawn would be nice. The other guys up top, I think, are just too expensive. Like Javon Hargrave.
Yeah. I don't think those guys are even in question. I know Niners fans like throwing them out. I don't think it makes sense. And I don't think it's prudent. I'm with you. I'm not as much on the Ioannidis wave, but I see that one makes sense. I really like Onyemata. I really like Poona Ford. And the last guy you mentioned, who's actually probably my favorite in terms of how under the radar he is and how talented I think he is Colin Saunders. I think Colin Saunders is a really good player, Larry. I think there's a lot of DJ Jones qualities to Colin Saunders. And similar to DJ Jones, I think there's an unlocked potential in terms of, obviously, there's this size and imposing figure, but there's a movement for such a big guy like DJ Jones. The play that really, showed me how special of an athlete DJ Jones was. Do you remember in 2019 against Carolina, he had that sack where it looked like D Ford was running down Kyle Allen. He was shot out of a cannon and he ran him down in the open field. Colin Saunders had a very similar play to that in the Super Bowl, where he ran down Jalen Hurts and he was like shot out of a cannon. And it reminded me so much of DJ Jones. I think that would be an ultimate value signing. And then, of course, Mark Pfeiffer brings up the other name, which is Kalia Davis. And I think you just need to bring in bodies in competition. I would bring Ridgeway back as well. I'm with you on that. But, Larry, I got to ask you for the last position
Simmons,
we're doing.
If you could get Simmons out of Tennessee, because, I mean, if they're getting rid of Derrick Henry, then, somebody flip off the lights, on the last one out, turn off the lights. I mean, if you're trading Derrick Henry, you're cooked anyway. I think Jeffrey Simmons is gettable.
But there's no way you're going to get Simmons for anything less than a first-round pick. If Buckner
I would trade a
13th overall pick, what first-round pick?
Well, I would trade a future first-round pick. That's how I think Simmons. The Niners want to have a dominant defensive line. Jeffrey Simmons would give them a dominant defensive line. You got to either find a badass in the draft, or you gotta find somebody in free agency who's serviceable. But the guy who you really need is Jeffrey Simmons. That's what you need.
Look, we're in an ideal world. I would agree with that.
Bowl.
If you want to know how I feel about Jeffrey Simmons, go to my channel, scroll down to dates added, loaded, whatever. First video ever done on this channel, or the second or third, was about Jeffrey Simmons being one of the most underrated players in the NFL 3 years ago. I love Jeffrey Simmons. I think he's an awesome football player. I don't know if he had necessarily his strongest season last year, but he's still a top 5 defensive tackle. But Larry, I just don't know how they could get him. I don't know what assets they have to get him, and I don't think they can afford him. It just, from that standpoint, I feel like we got to stick to the Colin Saunders and the Ioannidis names. Like, as much as we would like Jeffrey Simmons, Javon Hargrave, Daron Payne, it's just not affordable, is it? Or do you think it is? Do you think there's a way that Jeffrey Simmons can be acquired? You can give up the right amount of picks. You can satisfy them? Because I think they would get outbid too. Like Tennessee is not looking for a 2024 first. I think someone would offer them a 2023 first today for Jeffrey Simmons. And I think it would be a top 20 pick. To me, he's a better player than DeForest Buckner, who went for the 13th overall pick.
The only way it works really is if Tennessee was badly wanting Trey and you could make a deal involving him. Because you're right. They don't have the capital otherwise to make it happen. But I'll say this. I'm looking at the power players inside in the draft. Keanu Benton, Mozzie Smith.
I like that name, Mozzie.
Oh, Mozzie's freaking awesome. Dude, Mozzie, did 23 reps of 325, not 225, 325. He's a crazy athlete. His movement ability, his strength. Keanu Benton, Siaki Ika, Mozzie Smith, Jared Clark, Coastal Carolina, Robert Cooper, a little bit lesser degree, Florida State, Broderick Martin, Western Kentucky. There's some big, strong guys here, guys who are 330, who could really plug the middle. But every single one of them has a question about motor or movement ability, about, some of them are not in ideal shape. So you wonder about, just the ability to play 4 quarters. The one thing about Simmons is ready.
Right.
And Simmons is a big time guy, but you're right. It probably doesn't work unless somehow, some way, Rand Carthon's like has to have Trey Lance.
Right.
But yeah.
Right. That's the only way. And I will say this, Larry. I think part of those questions, given where the Niners are drafting, is why you pay Chris Kosaric. I think they pay him north of $1 million a year, right, to be the defensive line coach. You would hope that he can develop some of these talented players that may have issues. And I still think, by the way, while we're on this edge defensive tackle conversation, like I mentioned with Colton McKivitz, I have a little less sample size with this player, but I do believe in him physically. I do think there could be a Drake Jackson explosion here. That's very possible just because of how gifted the player is athletically. I know I'm always favoring these 49ers players that are, physically extremely gifted, and sometimes it leads to people getting mad. Like, for example, I still have some level of belief in Javon Kinlaw because of the physical capability of the man. You just don't find people that big, that athletic, like that hold the weight the way he does, that are as strong as he does. And similarly, I have a little bit of a feeling there towards Drake Jackson because he's so gifted athletically. Like,
no doubt. I mean, I think the same way about Kalia Davis. Kalia Davis, nobody saw it, but he was out on the practice field late in the year. And watching him move the way he did at 295, I walked up to him in the locker room after practice one day and I just started laughing. I'm like, it's coming, man. Your day's coming. And he looked me right in the eye. He knew exactly what I was talking about. He's like, he knew. He's like, he knows. He's talented. He's fast. He's an impact guy. He is going to be fun to watch, man. Now they couldn't get him on the field.
How does he hold his weight? Is it like just well distributed? He carries it like it's easy, or you can see the guy is
he's just
fully
fast.
Shredded, muscled up, holding his weight like he's maxed out his frame to the max.
No. I mean, he's got kind of a interesting build. He's got kind of a squatty build, but it's the leverage and the foot speed that really stand out. It's the combination of the leverage.
So
and the
he
foot
moved
speed.
really, really well. If you're saying that, like you saw, like, yeah.
I mean, like I'll give you an idea. Like Givens is a nice gap shooting one gap penetrator with quickness. This guy's even faster and bigger. He's Givens is about 280 and Kalia is like 295. So Kalia's and they're probably about this exact same height, but Kalia's faster. And you can see it.
Screw the rest of the conversation then. Well, it looks like the Niners might have a starting defensive tackle right there and there.
Yeah. Well, the thing is they're interior rushers. What they need is they got to have one guy. Maybe it's Kinlaw, maybe it's Ridgeway, maybe it's somebody in the draft, maybe it's Puna. They got to have somebody inside next to Armstead who
Colin
is not a
Saunders,
one gap
baby.
penetrator or pass rusher, but can actually, be a first and second down. You're not running in the A gaps kind of a tackle, and they don't have that piece. They lost it in DJ, and it's been noticeable. It's
Right.
been noticeable ever since DJ has come off the field that they can't stop the run at the point.
Right. And it could still be Kinlaw. It could still be Kinlaw, but you can't take that chance. You got to find somebody else. If it ends up being Kinlaw, that's great, but you can't come into the season with the expectation, given everything that goes on with his knee, that it's gonna be Kinlaw. And I think that's the mistake they made last year, right? They came in with the expectation that Kinlaw would be the ultimate replacement, and he was unfortunately on injured reserve by, was it week 4? Before the Atlanta game, he played the first 3 games, and the knee just unfortunately didn't hold up for the poor guy. I hope it does at some point and he's actually able to play through, but we'll see about that. Finally, Larry, we've made it 1 hour, 40 minutes. Let's try and not hit the 2 hour mark, or do we just make me sound like a liar here? But we do gotta touch on the safety position. Free safety is obviously a need here. Would this be a draft for Larry Krueger? Would this be a free agency? Or I'm actually going to give you the option for this one of both because, full disclosure, I think both is the correct answer to this question.
Well, there's guys I like in both. I wouldn't pay Bates that kind of money.
I agree.
I wouldn't.
I agree.
I'd rather pay Jimmy less to keep him. One, it matters. Continuity matters on your offensive line and in your defensive backfield. So, you're not going from Jimmy Ward to Jesse Bates and just trimming 5 years off and saying, "Oh yeah, well, we're ahead of the game." No, not necessarily. You might be ahead of the game, you might not. That being said, I don't really love the free agent safety market. There's a few guys I like, but very few. I like Jimmy Ward, and I'd like to bring Jimmy Ward back. That's a guy that I really, really like. But then when I start looking down the list, it's not a good list. Yeah, there's a lot of guys who just can't play or can no longer play. Nazir Adderley is one of my favorite guys for the Chargers. I think he'd be nice. Juan Thornhill from the Chiefs I think
Stud.
is a good player, really good player. I don't think I'd bring back Tayshaun Gibson. I don't think he's good enough in coverage. He can Chauncey Gardner-Johnson. I
Right.
absolutely
You
would go
want
after
that.
him. But I mean, that's it. That's my
There's
entire
one
list.
name. There's one name you hadn't mentioned there that I liked. I liked him last year too. He went back to Pittsburgh on a 1 year, $3 million deal. Thought he was outstanding this year. Had the best season of his career, and that's Terrell Edmonds.
Yeah.
Um, Really, really gifted player. Really underrated in coverage. In fact, for such a big guy, he had so many issues tackling early in his career, but he moves so well for such a big guy, covers ground so well. He's very,
That's a good
very good in
call.
coverage. He's very good covering tight ends. I think they
But
should
there's a
bring
lot
in
of good safeties in the draft.
right, and
I
that's
mean
where I was
that's
gonna
the other
go.
question.
I think the Niners need to have some sort of developmental prospect. Like, I think this is a position they need to draft because there does need to be a long-term answer here, Larry. They don't even have a young guy on this roster at safety that we could even look at as a prospective starter. George Odom is kind of purely a special teams guy, right? And Tarvarius Moore might be gone. And they don't have a guy that you're even grooming that could have a chance to be a starter, right? So I do think that you have to draft the position from that standpoint, not necessarily for a starter this year, but just to have a young guy you like that could possibly play special teams that a couple years down the road could be your starter next to Fonga if he continues on this track and is a long-term starter at safety. We know he's the immediate starter coming off of this terrific all-pro season last year. And then I'm with you. They got to address it in free agency. I wouldn't touch Bates. I don't think the money is right, and I don't think the money is worth it for him. He's a good player, but especially for the 49ers, what they look to do, he's really, really good at fitting the run from depth, but there is a size limitation and there is a usage limitation where him and Hufanga would be less interchangeable perhaps than what Hufanga and Gibson were, just because Bates has limitations playing in the box. And so I do think that he's not a player I like for that price for this team and this defense. And then I'm with you. I do like Jimmy Ward and Chauncey Gardner-Johnson. I don't know if those guys would be a little too expensive. I think there's a lot of players actually in this free agency, like a Marcus Epps, for an example, that have decent enough games, well-rounded enough games where if you put them on this defense in this scheme, with these pass rushers and particularly this middle linebacker who bails out so many different things in coverage with his ability to cover ground and his feel for not only things in front of him, but concepts developing behind him. I like Fred Warner has rare feel for like in breaking routes on how to get depth right into them and all of that. He's an outstanding player. I think a guy like a Marcus Epps, somebody like that, a Juan Thornhill, I think is an awesome player, could, fit the role for a year. I'm not a big fan of bringing back Gibson. I'm with you. I think Gibson had a very good year, but I also think it was a little bit of a one-off year. And I'm not sure necessarily at this point in this age that he can replicate that production. Maybe I'm completely wrong though. And they bring him back, he kills it, and they still draft a guy. But ultimately, Larry, I do think this is a position they got to double up in. They got to have a short-term answer at veteran to play next year, and then with the third, fourth, or even a fifth-round pick, you got to draft somebody with traits that could possibly become a starter down the road. You might not hit on the pick, but just somebody you're developing as a guy to be a starter down the road. What do you think?
Well, it's an interesting group. I mean, the guy in the draft, I mean, Brian Branch and Antonio Johnson. Branch played at Bama. Antonio Johnson played at A&M. I think those guys are going in round one.
First round, right?
Yeah. I really like the Boise State 6'4" guy, Skinner, but I think he tore his ACL in preparation for the combine. So he's going
Branch
to
is
miss his.
also a weird player if we're talking fit for the 49ers. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Just
No,
because
no.
he played star at Alabama, right? He played the slot, what they call the star position, the Minka Fitzpatrick role. And he's a heady player. He's a terrific player, but he didn't necessarily play safety there. And he played corner, but he can't run. He can't run to be a corner. He ran slow at the combine, and he is someone I actually ended up watching, weirdly
Who are you
enough.
talking
I
about?
don't know why I watched him. Brian Branch.
Oh, Branch.
Um,
Yeah.
from Alabama, but he does not run like a corner on film where you could say, well, that time was not maybe as fast as he is. He does run like a 4.55 guy. So that's why I think the move is there to safety, but and he's a really, really good player. It's just kind of hard to project just because he played star, right? He didn't necessarily play as a true safety.
My two favorite guys that I would definitely invest a third round pick in one of these two guys, Jair Brown from Penn State,
There we
who
go.
is a tremendous player. He was the MVP of the Rose Bowl against Utah. He's a crazy athlete, and he's a really good football player, and I like him in coverage. And then Jamie Robinson from Florida State. I think he's a culture player. There's some limitations to Jamie Robinson in coverage, but I mean, this is a culture changing tough guy who would, give your secondary a real presence.
Brown,
Marte,
what about Brown versus Jaquan Brisker from last year?
I think Brisker was better
Okay.
than Brown, but Brisker had a really good year this year too.
Terrific
So,
player, yeah.
Jair Brown is a really nice player. I like him a lot. I think he might be one of the most well-rounded safeties. Trey Dean from Florida is a big rangy guy as well. And there are others. I mean, Jervarius Owens from Houston is a day 3 guy, but he's had a really good career. I watched him. Marte Mapu from Sac State. Now, granted, I went to Sac State, but I like Mapu as a Niner draft pick on day 3 as a special teamer who could probably play a little weak side backer, who might be able to play a little special teams. I really like Mapu from Sac State. I think he's a really underrated football player. And then day 3, Christian Young. I watched him in the Pac-12 at Arizona. He's built like a tank, man. He's 6'3", he's 220, he hits you. He's another really great athlete. So those are the guys that kind of stand out to me. I haven't I haven't seen every single guy, but those are the one. The one thing about safety, it's like safety and inside backer. There's no such thing as, I'm not saying they can be scouted by looking at their statistics, but there's no such thing as an awesome safety that just doesn't make any tackles or big plays. And there's no such thing as an awesome linebacker who just doesn't make any tackles. So in a lot of times, these guys in the middle of the field, you got a real good idea based on their production who can play, and then you only want the workouts to just kind of refine your opinions. If you're falling in love with safeties at the combine, you're probably going to make mistakes.
Taylor Mays, anybody?
Bingo. Yeah. Dana Hall. You want to go back further? The guy was supposedly going to replace Ronnie Lott. Mike Rumpf. I mean, there's others.
Mike Rumpf played corner, right?
Mike Rumpf was a corner, but I mean, he really didn't have corner speed.
Big guy. I remember
but
my
I'll tell
dad
you this:
used to always tell me when I was little.
A free agent
go ahead.
corner. I'd rather, like, if I'm the Niners, I'd rather try to stock up the cornerback unit, because I feel like if you have corners, you're okay. You can always get by with an extra corner playing a safety spot in coverage. Where you're screwed is if you have too many safeties, not enough corners, and now it's like you lose a corner or two, and now you have no way to even match up.
Right.
That's
and worst case scenario, the 49ers always have, even with his torn ACL. I saw him mention in the comments too, they have good old Dante Johnson to come back and play both corner and safety in a pinch. I'm half joking, but Larry, it's an hour and 51 minutes right now. If I stopped it, at least I'm only 95% of a liar. No, I'm joking. Jokes aside, this really was an awesome show. I joke about the time, but I actually do appreciate how organic that conversation is for us to get here. I hope that people listening feel that way too. As always, really appreciate the support. The comments are always very, very fun because it just makes the stream that much better when you're able to interact back and forth. There were a few questions, Larry, from the YouTube community tab that if you want, we can hit them.
Yeah.
We did hit them already really in the stream, but we didn't hit them. But we're talking about quick, rapid fire. So at Kobe fan 3846 asked, should Baker Mayfield be the quarterback the 49ers try and go after in free agency? I think we touched on this a little bit earlier. Ooh, yes, my mistake. I did miss a few questions here. Before we go to that, Omar Anwar asks, are NFL teams colluding versus Lamar? Sorry about that, Omar.
No. Nobody's colluding. There's too much pressure to win.
I don't know if they're colluding necessarily, Larry.
It's just that nobody wants to pay that price. And there's a lot of questions about Lamar's health, and he hasn't done it in the playoffs.
Larry, I think even with those questions and not doing it in the playoffs, I think there's something weird about more teams being quarterback needy. In fact, not even being quarterback needy, jumping into the Deshaun Watson sweepstakes when he was 2 years away from football. He had major questions about his personal life, all of that. You had to give him a new contract too. And you want to talk about somebody that technically hasn't done it in the playoffs. Deshaun Watson, you can, I guess, throw in that category as well.
It was just cash.
I'm not saying it's collusion, but there's something weird here on the Lamar Jackson. What are you talking about? There was 3 first-round picks that the Browns traded for Deshaun Watson.
Wasn't it just a cash deal?
They traded 3 first-round picks, a third-round pick for Deshaun Watson, and a sixth, and then they gave him $230 million guaranteed. And the New Orleans Saints were involved. The Atlanta Falcons were involved. There were a bunch of teams involved. And how did they all say no to Lamar Jackson today without even going into the conversation? Lamar Jackson has been a perfect person off the field. He has not had these issues. He won an MVP, something Deshaun Watson never has done.
I think there's an awful lot of people that want to see Lamar have a bounce back monster year similar to what he did in 2019. If he had that kind of year, there would be all kinds of teams after him. But because of the things I've alluded to, there's people there that are like, you know what? I don't want, that you're gonna have to satisfy them every way imaginable. You're trading 2 number ones. You're giving him a ton of cash. He's had 2 years in a row that are kind of nothing spectacular. So I don't know.
I mean, I feel like the 2 number ones, the 49ers traded 2 number ones and then used the third to take a quarterback who had 600 throws since his freshman year of high school. I feel like we're holding Lamar here to a standard when we're talking about 2 number ones, as if the guy hasn't had, 4 different years where he's been a top 10 quarterback in the NFL. I don't mean that as a shot in any way at Trey Lance. I just feel like, when we're describing value here with Lamar Jackson, like, what does he need? What did Deshaun Watson prove, with how many different allegations against him and 2 years away from football
Totally
that had
different
all these
player.
teams interested in wanting to talk to him, and now they have no interest in even considering getting a former MVP?
I mean, they know more than we do, but different players. I mean, Lamar is a player who I think has to have that running ability to be the player that he is. Where I think Deshaun Watson is much more of a pocket passer who has scrambling ability and doesn't lean on his ability to run as the foundation for what makes him a top tier quarterback. Maybe that's why. Excuse me.
I think there's something to that, Larry. But I think it's I think there's I don't know if we can go to the word collusion, because I think your underlying thing about being there's too much pressure to win for there to be actual collusion, I do agree with. So I don't know if I can go that far, but I definitely don't think there's something not sitting right here. But I guess we'll talk a discussion for another day. Let's go back to that YouTube community
Well, there's
question though.
also
My
wait.
fault. Oh, go ahead.
There's also, you got to remember this. Isn't there a time period that the Ravens have? Isn't it like a 1 week period to match?
Yeah, yeah. And so
Isn't your
okay, so
money have to be like in escrow, like locked up and
yeah, yes.
reserved?
Yes.
So if the thinking, and John Harbaugh has stated it repeatedly, that the Ravens are going to retain this player. So the idea that you're going to put your entire organization through this big upheaval, free up all this cap room, commit it in a competitive environment to one player where you cannot use that for other players right in the middle of free agency. I don't know. To
So
me, I
so
think
I
that's
think
a
that's the
factor.
point right there, Larry. And I'm so glad you went there, because that's where I wanted to go to. And I tweeted that this is kind of my speculation on what's happening. I tweeted this as well. But we know Lamar Jackson, obviously, his mother represents him, or technically he represents himself. He doesn't have an agency. And one of the things that's been reported with Baltimore in this negotiation is that it's been difficult for them to negotiate with Lamar, because sometimes he's just been unavailable to negotiate. And that's been the toughest part for them, because they've been unable to even talk about finding a common ground, right? Eric DeCosta recently went all the way to Florida to go try and talk to Lamar. And one of the things I thought that was never reported that much about him before the draft, that a lot of people I remember listening at the time seemed to say that were insiders, is that the kind of management of not having an agent during the time. If you remember, a lot of people were like, "Oh, Lamar Jackson's getting undervalued during the draft." Well, teams were a little bit finding it a little bit hard to communicate with him at the time as well, because his mom was his agent, and communication then and there was hard with him, and that's why he fell down draft boards despite being as gifted as he is. And so my theory basically is that Baltimore put the non-exclusive tag on him so that another team does the negotiation with them, comes up with the deal, and then all they have to do is match the offer, get Lamar to sign it, and that's how they were going to acquire him. So that's my theory, Larry, that's away from collusion. Now there's something weird to it, but the other than collusion, other than something not making sense, the one theory I would have is that, and the reason teams don't want him is they know Baltimore is just using them for the negotiation, and they don't want to go through that BS, wasting time giving basically negotiating Baltimore's contract for Lamar Jackson for them. And so that would be the other theory.
Yeah. And also, they can wait the entire week, and basically you've got taken a huge amount of cap room, and you've just basically parked it off to the side in a competitive environment. Why would you do that? I mean, that you would almost have to be, you would need to be a team that has lots of cap room but no real interest in using it on anything but a quarterback. It's just there's circumstance here. And I think the Ravens have made it plain, plain and simple that they're going to match. So
Right.
why go through this whole thing and song and dance to just, as you said, negotiate a deal, for the Ravens with their star player and do all the work and not get paid, not get any of the benefit.
Yeah. And that's really what it comes down to me. If we want to take the collusion out of it, I just feel like the Baltimore Ravens are too well run, too smart an organization to let a franchise quarterback walk out the door. I don't think they'll just let him walk out the door for free and take 2 first-round picks and say that's it. Because I think Lamar Jackson in a trade, you should be able to get more than 2 first-round picks for him. Just mention 49ers traded 2 for Trey Lance.
I think the Ravens are going to make a trade involving the quarterback, but I think they will figure out a way to trade Tyler Huntley to somebody.
Me
That'll
too.
be
I
my
think
guess.
they'll get decent value for him too. He's not terrible. I don't know if he's a
not
starter,
bad.
but he's a fringe starter backup type guy.
He's definitely one of the 100 best quarterbacks in the league. You know,
I would say 50, 40.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, there's 100 jobs, let's say.
Oh
in the
yeah,
league.
touche. You got me.
He's
There.
got.
You're absolutely
He's
right.
definitely good enough to have one of them.
Oh, without a doubt. Without a doubt. So Larry, thoughts real quick. Let's just try to get to these questions in the YouTube community tab. My fault, by the way, for not mentioning them earlier. I did ask for people to mention questions. I didn't expect. I underestimated us. I didn't expect us to be able to have such natural conversation here. Thought it was a dry day. Perhaps, I needed a little bit of help in some topics. But somebody asked, or let me mention their name correctly. Sorry about that. Kobe fan 3846 asks, should Baker Mayfield be a quarterback the 49ers go after in free agency?
I say yes. Because you got to remember this, all these quarterbacks can be rehabilitated and I like quarterbacks who you can get cheaply, rehabilitate them and trade them for a good price. And Zach Wilson would fit that description. I'd be interested in him. Marcus Mariota, in my opinion, could fit that description. I'd be interested in him. And Baker Mayfield fits that description. He's young enough, and he's got some moxie, and I think he's got a good arm. He's gotten beaten up the last couple of years behind not a bad line. It's just kind of a bad pass blocking line. So I think, yeah. And, Baker Mayfield would be smart to come here and rehabilitate his whole image and watch and learn and maybe potentially win a Super Bowl. So, yeah, if I was Baker Mayfield, I've done a ton of commercials. My commercial to wins ratio is not very good. And I need to kind of light and the entire league needs to take a new look at me. And I think they will if he plays with this Niner team, with this defense, or with a good defense and a really good play caller and a bunch of great weapons. And
so you
I
don't
think
like that this is our house?
Any
You don't
quarterback
like
should
that
want
this
to
is
play
our
here. And
house
I
commercials?
think he should.
You don't like the This Is Our House commercials?
All of his commercials are just like, dude, you're doing a ton of commercials. You haven't won anything. That's the first thing I always think when I'm watching these commercials. Why am I listening to you? You're not Terry Bradshaw. You're not Joe Montana. You're not even Jim McMahon. You know what I mean? It's like you're not you haven't won. So it's all, it's weird to see somebody do tons of commercials who hasn't won.
So I like the Baker Mayfield idea. I don't know if they'll actually get him because I do think Baker might be able to sneak himself into a starting job because he might turn out to be like the cheap option that's the only thing like a team like Tampa Bay can get, if you know what I'm saying. So I think he might sneak himself into a starting job, but I do think it's a good option. I am a little biased. I'm wearing my Oklahoma sweatshirt here as well. My uncle's a professor there. No, my uncle's a professor there. I do have a little bit of fandom there. And I did like Baker Mayfield before the draft. Now, I didn't think he should have been the number 1 overall pick, but I did like him. So there's some remaining bias there. Omar Anwar. I hope I'm pronouncing Omar Anwar. I'm so sorry if I mispronounced that. Again, kind enough to donate. Sorry about the first question. That's my fault. But here I am with the second one right on time. I didn't mean collusion in that sense, in the sense that teams wanted to make sure guaranteed money doesn't get as high as it did with Watson ever again. I think this is plausible. What about you, Larry?
That they're colluding to no, I don't believe I do not believe
I don't think they
teams
want
are
to give the
colluding
guaranteed contract
against Lamar or against anything involving keeping the they may have a similar view of the world, but they're not actually in collusion. In collusion means they've actively partnered to make sure this outcome became a reality. And you're
Right.
asking me, do I believe that? No, I do not
No.
believe that.
I agree. I think that description is right on. Now, the word collusion is where it gets tricky because it's a very specific word that describes a specific thing. But Omar, if you're asking, is it fishy? Does it feel like teams are avoiding the big elephant in the room, which was Deshaun Watson's fully guaranteed contract? Does it feel like teams are doing everything they can not to be hand out that contract to NFL players and are really, really pissed that Jimmy Haslam gave that contract to Deshaun Watson? I think so. I do think so. But the word collusion there, as Larry said, yes, can't say that. Um, Larry, there's also a couple more questions from the
Yeah.
community tab. I promise these will be quick. My fault. I know, taking a lot of your time here. Raphael 562 Niners says it's time the 49ers drafted tight end. I do think we spent a lot of time talking tight end in the draft. And then finally, Justin Schrettweiser 4211 asks a very interesting question. So I'll read the full comment for you. He says, I have an idea that I feel like should be talked about, pros and cons, not just football, but as to sports in general. I feel like there should be a quote unquote financial break that teams get by drafting and developing rookies into pros. For example, I feel like Nick Bosa should be able to get max money, but not all of the dollars hit the bottom line against the cap. They will financially keep that will keep players financially wanting to stay with the team that drafted them. That would have kept Debo happy. That would keep the Warriors from moving on from Dre and maybe Mookie Betts. That would be able to stay in Boston instead of being traded to the Dodgers. Just a few example thoughts. So I think he's looking for a little NBA style where the NBA allows the
Bird
team that
rights.
drafted the bird rights, but it also allows a little bit more money on top of that max, right? The team that usually drafted you has the biggest chance of offering you that big contract right away, which is why they like to sign the contract and then get traded so that they can maximize the money while being exactly where they want to be. What do you think of this financially, Larry? And we'll
I
kind of end
agree.
our
I've been
show with
saying this
this.
for years. They should incentivize players to stay with their original team by not having players that you draft and develop go against the cap. I think baseball ought to start their own salary cap and do the exact same thing. Do not count players who were drafted and developed and promoted to the major leagues as people that count against the cap. Only have basically what amounts to a free agent or trade cap so that teams can't buy, so no owner could buy a team, essentially go into the sport, blow up the market, sign all the top free agents, and like you can in baseball, you have a Florida Marlins situation,
Right.
win a World Series, and then tear the whole thing down. It's not good for it's not good for a sport that has, that's all tied together financially through arbitration. And the fact that they allowed it in baseball kind of shows that it's kind of a rudderless ship. As far as the other sports are concerned, yeah. And why should they do it? They should be the league should be incentivized to do it, whether it be the NBA, the NFL, MLB. Why? Because the relationship between the fan and the player is a central core relationship in the value of your business. And if your fans have a relationship with your players, that relationship is how you get paid. If they don't have a relationship with your players, then they're probably not going to be as apt to buy a ticket or buy merchandise. And so it's all tied into good business. And I think you should incentivize teams to be able to keep their own players, build those relationships so that the fans of Chicago love the players of Chicago, that the fans of San Francisco love those players, and there's a real connection. Right now, you could argue why should the 49ers trade back for a bunch of extra picks, draft 15 guys, sign 7 or 8 great undrafted free agents? Why should they hustle that much if they're just going to be forced to give those players to the Rams and Cardinals and Seahawks in their own division? Which is, basically the way it is now. You can only have so many guys. What I would say is incentivize, make it so that that the competition, the central competition, is about the original race for talent coming out in the amateur draft. The draft is the bloodline to the sport, and the team that handicaps the bloodline to the sport the best should be, consistently benefiting from their knowledge and expertise. Not the way it is now, where it's like everybody's the same and you're just basically scouting guys. You have them for a couple of years, but 3 years down the road, you got to hand them to the Cowboys because you just can't afford them. There should be some mechanism within the cap that allows these teams to retain those players. And then also, I think that would create an ability for teams to potentially build a dynasty if they had a great drafting, front office. And at the end of the day, I think that should be where you should build your football team, is in the draft. So, yeah, I'm all for it. I think it's a great idea.
I don't know if I necessarily feel that way. I do think you made a lot of very, very strong points. But I'm also kind of okay with how the setup is. I like the kind of balance between mobility, and then I just like how the salary cap makes a lot of the conversations about the sport so much better. I really do. I feel like having that number makes it way more complicated. It makes it way harder to just accumulate stars. It provides great parity and balance, and it feels like every year, teams fall off, teams get better. I one of the things that's hardest to watch about the NBA for me as a Detroit Pistons fan is comparison, is that my favorite team has been horrible for the last 20 years, and they have no chance of getting
But
better for the
here's the
next
thing,
two,
though,
three
Fish.
years. And
Can I jump in on you one thing?
sure, go ahead.
There's really only a couple ways to build your football team: free agency or the draft are the primary two. Trades, I guess, and street free agents, you could all call that another category. But it's basically trades and free agency. Free agency is lopsided. If you have a big market with a brand new stadium with revenue that comes out of your ears, you have more, you can be more competitive in free agency. It's blatantly unfair. The one thing about the draft is inherently fair. The best teams get the last pick, the worst team gets the first pick. So it's slated for the worst teams to get the better picks. And the only way that the better teams would get the better players is if they are better evaluators. So I like, rewarding that evaluate. First of all, maybe I feel this way because I was an evaluator, but I actually feel like if you have the best scouts, if you do the best job evaluating, if you can sit there and say, that guy's a nobody and that guy's Brock Purdy, and be right, that should pay off. That you should get ahead of the Rams and the Cardinals and the Seahawks if you can say that guy's Brock Purdy and that guy's Nate Sudfeld. You know what I mean? And
I think so, but at the same time, I do think
it's a competitive deal.
I do think some of the roster cap and some of the cap space adds to the kind of intrigue of the sport, where you do have to make decisions between good players and stuff like that. And
But why is
again,
that
I
good?
think
Why is it good to kiss off a good player who your fans love, who you like and you found, drafted and developed, and now
I
you've got to
didn't
get rid of them
I
just
didn't say it
because you
was
did a
good
good
though, right?
job? That's
I
almost
didn't say
like
it was I didn't say it
backwards.
was good. I didn't say it was good. I just felt like I feel like it adds to the parity of the sport in terms of,
Is
okay, if
parity
you're able
good?
to get every good player and you're able to keep every good player, I guess it's fine. But at some point there has to be some level of rules, right? That we follow. Okay, you can keep like 200 players on your roster, then finances do come to be a part of
But
this
look
conversation,
at the
because some
drama
people
it
can't.
would provide the draft. Look how much
But some people
juice the
can't,
draft would
Larry.
then
Some
have.
people, you're missing the point that some owners can't just afford to keep 200 players just because you keep drafting and keeping undrafted free agents. Like Mark Davis and the Raiders aren't going to be able to keep as many players as Jerry Jones and the Cowboys. Even if you have the same amount of good players, money also runs out.
Okay, maybe there could be an, I mean, there's a lot of different ways, there's lots of different ways you could do this to incentivize teams to, all you have to do is say, you know what, for every player like DJ Jones who you draft and develop, um, the player still, you still have to pay the player, to keep them, but it only cost like maybe 20, maybe you get a 25% cut on the cap. So maybe you paid him 7.5 million, maybe you paid him 10 million, but you only get charged for 7.5 million on the cap because you drafted him. Just
But
some
again, what if you
incentive
don't have the
to,
money to pay the 10 million?
I
You're
mean,
incentivizing the richest owners again and the biggest markets.
I you're giving an incentive to teams to put more into their draft efforts because there's a
You've already given that
reward.
incentive, though.
But
You've
there's a
already given
reward
that
for drafting
incentive.
well.
Wait, wait, wait,
Right
wait.
now there's
That
no
incentive
reward.
already exists. That incentive already exists when you have a set rookie wage scale. Rookies are cheaper. The vet minimum is $1 million. The league is already incentivized for people to look for these younger and draft these younger, cheaper players to fill out the roster, because in a salary cap league, it gives you optimum opportunity to have the most talented roster because it's all about value. So if you have the youngest, cheapest players who are the most talented, you will have the best roster. So the league has already incentivized this idea of drafting and developing, because if you do that well, you have younger and cheaper players. They have a fixed rookie wage scale.
Yeah, but I mean, there's other mechanisms within the game that they could do more to reward the teams that draft well. Right now, it's just a hard cap, and after the rookie scale, you've got five good players. Now you're only going to be able to pay two of them. I don't know. It's like you're asking fans to have a relationship, and you're selling hope, and then it just I don't know. I don't love it. I don't love the fact that if you're awesome at the draft, there's no real benefit to you other than for maybe a year. There should be more. If you go 5 years in a row and you're better than everybody else in the draft, then you should have a dominant team. You shouldn't have to give away all those players just because they're good and other people want them. You should be able to at least have them on your
Well,
roster
what's
for
the
a cheaper
example of
amount of
this?
money.
Give me an example of somebody losing 8 different good players because they were drafting so
The
great. And
1990s Dallas Cowboys. I mean, I didn't care, but the Cowboys were
can
the
you give me an
youngest team
example
in
of
the
my
NFL.
lifetime,
When the
please?
Cowboys won their second ring, they were the youngest team in the NFL, and they had won back-to-back titles. And only the cap tore that whole thing apart. And you're going to tell me that was good? It was good for the other teams, but it wasn't good for the league because it's been proven. Fans love
Didn't
dynasties.
Jerry Jones push
Dynasties are
for the
what
cap,
create
though?
memories.
Didn't
Memories
Jerry
are what
Jones
sell
push
the
for the
league.
cap? Didn't Jerry Jones push for the cap? So
I don't know.
because from the way I've read in NFL history, Jerry Jones was one of the forefronts of people looking to have a salary cap on the league. I don't know the history of that. I wasn't there. I wasn't alive. So I'll take your word
I
for
mean,
it for sure. But yeah,
the league has succeeded, has succeeded during this cap era. The popularity of the sport has grown by leaps and bounds, but we only, people use that as like, oh, well, look how successful the league has been. But we don't know if it would have been more successful if they had incentivized the draft. All I'm saying is right now, you're drafting for yourself a little bit, but you're also drafting for the rest of the league.
I think
I
this
would
point
like it
is
so
so
you're drafting
important.
for yourself solely.
I think this point is so important. It destroys the value of small market teams, I think. Um,
So now we're going to argue that the Dallas Cowboys of the 90s are bad for the NFL, that the Yankees are
Larry, I
bad, that
think
dynasties are bad. I mean, seriously, why don't we just have everybody go 8-8 and we'll just, I mean, parity is you have to have some parity in your sport, but there has to be some mechanism for for a spectacular effort, and that's what it would be. You're it, you know why can't the general managers compete? I want to see the general managers compete. And
I,
if you have an awesome general manager, you should be winning.
but is a general manager's job solely drafting? Like, isn't managing the cap, managing the finances, making decisions like this? I think this is probably a conversation we need to take for another time. I feel like we've gone a little bit over time and it's a little bit late for me as well. So maybe we need to go. I did want to pull up this comment. I'm not sure how my question came across to you, Larry. It was asked, I thought, in a respectful manner, but apparently I'm in
Kindergarten.
not kindergarten, kindergarten. But I wasn't sure if my question came off in that way. I apologize. I was just looking for some context that I could relate to. Because
No, I
obviously,
mean,
if you bring
it's
up the
good.
Dallas Cowboys from the 90s, it's hard for
I
me
just
to.
I just would love to see, like, if you're real, like, there was a day before free agency where your team was great based on your ability to draft, develop, and promote your young talent. And that was the only way to get good. There was no free agency. Now we've gone to free agency, and free agency is good for the players. And free agency, you could say, is good for discussion. But ultimately, free agency also is allowed, teams, the owners, to buy teams in baseball, spend ridiculously, blow up the salary structure, and then ride off into the sunset like nothing happened. And all I'm saying is, if you create these incentives on the draft and you kind of de-incentivize the free agency, you don't have that volatility that you have in some of the other sports, like you've had in baseball. Football has mechanisms right now to help it. It's been great. People love the parity. All I'm saying is, it's just, we don't really get to see the super teams like we do of yesteryear because there's so many
Do you want that
elements of
though?
parity.
I
Yeah,
because I
I
feel like
want
I
to
feel
see
like
super
even
teams.
without the super teams, right? New England. Okay, I
Cowboys,
it,
you cannot
look,
convince me the
look.
Cowboys Niners of the 90s was bad for the NFL. It
I
wasn't.
wasn't around then, and I'm not going to argue. I've seen every one of those games from the rivalry multiple times, and I wasn't born in that era. So that tells you there's a level of fame to it. Now, I do think we do need to end the show. It's been 2 hours and 20 more minutes. It's really late for me. I do got to get to bed, and get to the gym. By the way, I have way too much energy to go to sleep. The one last thing I did want to add, is I don't know if I necessarily agree with that because there have been dominant teams in this era. Kansas City has been to 5 straight AFC championship games, 3 Super Bowls in 4 years, and won 2 of them. New England went to 8 Super Bowls in 20 years. New England was more dominant in the salary cap era. When you want to talk about a dominant team, New England was more dominant in the salary cap era than any of those other teams. So I mean, the years of longevity, the years of success, like I do feel like there has to be something there that goes against your point. In a salary cap era, they did it, and they did it with different iterations of teams, which I think is cooler. I think it's cooler to win 3 rings with the core of Ty Law, Willie McGinnis, Richard Seymour, those guys, and then come back with McCourty and with Edelman and with Gronk and win 3 more there too. I think this was a fantastic conversation and a fantastic question. Shout out to Justin Straightweiser 4211. I know that it's a little bit inconclusive here because Larry and I stand on opposite ends of the spectrum, and maybe we weren't able to fully debate this thing out because of time constraints and because of some age constraints, because Larry is harping on eras that I unfortunately cannot speak to or argue for or against because I don't have experience there. But Larry, either way, awesome show, man. I really appreciate you as always. You've given way too much of your time today. You've been up since 5:30 a.m. So just shout out to you and your work ethic and just the time that you give me as well. I really, really appreciate it. But thanks everybody for watching. It's been an awesome show. Please like, subscribe. Make sure you're subscribed to the Krug Show. Larry and I will be back on the Krug Show Thursday or Friday. What are you thinking, Larry?
I'm thinking Friday because I'm going to go live from Arizona. So I would
All
love
right.
if Vish, you could join me when I'm doing my Krug show from Arizona. And I'd love to have you on Friday, maybe Friday evening. I'll be in the mountain time zone.
Sounds good to me. I think we could do that. Unfortunately, I don't have a lot of information I can give you on spring training or baseball. But if you want
That's
to talk
okay. We'll talk
Niners,
football. We'll talk football.
yeah,
We'll
because
talk
we'll have
Niners.
Brock Purdy surgery news too. So we'll be
Exactly. We'll have a
right
lot to
there.
get to Friday night.
This off the hamster wheel. I'm pulling up his question. Just I am a lot of people are pointing out that I'm cranky. I am a little bit of cranky because this guy's talking.
No.
I don't know what he's saying. According to my generation, if it did not happen during their lifetime, it didn't happen. Larry, once during our conversation, did I say any of those things didn't happen, or
No.
did I just say I didn't have perspective on them because I wasn't alive? This
People
is
need to start
unbelievable
stopping.
to me, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
stop starting
I
stuff.
usually avoid conversating and interacting with this stuff, but this was a little bit out of hand. And like people have mentioned, it is a little late. I'm a little cranky. Things happen, but what a show. Thank you everybody for joining. Like, subscribe, comment down below, what you enjoyed about this show, who you agree with. I have a feeling more people are going to agree with Larry than me. Oh gosh, did I miss another super chat? I'm sorry, Titus. Let me scroll up. Oh, I'm not going to. Oh, I did miss this. He said the NFL is not parity. Yep. I do think parity accounts for competitiveness, but let's not continue this. Titus, I can't find your super chat. If you could just post your comment down below, I'd love to get it here before we go. Especially back in my day, I walked up both ways in 2 feet of snow. I thought,
look at Red Eye. Larry's an old ass for his age. He's only 50. He's only 50s. Looks like a boomer. 70s.
Krug, I think you're looking quite young, but
thanks,
what
man.
really is getting me is the energy. Where does this come from?
I don't know, man. I got to get up early tomorrow. I'm off to spring training.
Are you driving?
Yes.
Do you think you might say hi to Brock Purdy before he goes down to Dallas for his surgery? Give it a little update.
I would love to. We need to get Brock on the show.
That's what I'm saying. You did get his roommates, right? He's got to join them. He's got to join them.
Nick next year's center.
Titus, I'm sorry I missed your question. If you could throw it in the chat real quick, would be real nice. Yeah, I would.
Larry, you're lazy. You're lazy.
Wow, Red Eye, I might have to block you here. This is getting
oh my god! Look at Red Eye just going after me. Now he's going after gray hair. Oh my gosh!
I'm nervous, Larry, because I have one individual gray hair that I found. And Titus, yes, I do remember this question. I'm sorry, I did see it. I just forgot to highlight it. Thank you for asking it again. Oh, here it is. Thank you. I was able to scroll up and find it. Sorry about that. I need to get better at this.
I love the draft.
I
love the draft.
Titus, okay, perfect. Larry, your time is the draft. My time is December. December of the NFL season. The mixture of from that Thanksgiving football stretch through December through the playoffs. I love it. It's magical. I love everything that goes into it. I love the Thanksgiving food, the Thanksgiving football. That time of the year for me, it's unbeatable. Draft is probably second, Larry. Draft is probably second.
I'll say this, the draft, and then for me, minicamp, because minicamp is when I first get to actually see the players that the team drafted, and that to me is when it's really fun.
Minicamp, interesting. That's a very interesting one.
Draft and then minicamp. The first rookie minicamp, when you first get to see him out there on the field, because you get a real good idea right away, what kind of athletes you just drafted.
Off Hamster Wheel is asking me, do I know Broadway Joe? Yes, of course I know who Joe Namath is. I'm going to refrain from saying anything here. I will say that I feel like I have gone back and read a lot about NFL history. So if you want to play this game of asking me questions, go ahead. But I don't know if that's going to end that well for you. Yeah, I need to stop talking. That's enough of me for today. Thank you everybody for watching. This is the 8th different time I'm ending the show. I think I might actually end it here. Poor Larry's been here listening to me ramble on and on and on for 2 hours and 30 minutes. He needs a break, but we'll catch you next time on the Krug Show on Friday, live from Arizona, where Larry Krueger will be at spring training.
See you there.